some time ago. The wind was slightly swaying the trees, picking up the leaves torn from those very trees. Birds soared into the sky. In the midst of this silence, the main character reflected that his goal was to live carefree. Leisure is very important for a man, and he has always appreciated it. Always give your best for 60–80% of your capabilities, but at the same time give your best for only 10%. What a waste of time this is. Due to the fact that the hero worked like a horse, he finally got a 16-day paid vacation. Having decided to hold it successfully, he went abroad, visited a famous restaurant. The bus, which had been calmly following stone roads before, moved off its route due to a hole in the road. The driver carefully turned the steering wheel, and the guy walking with the tablet in his hand staggered back in fright. People going about their business stopped to look at the overturned bus, which broke through part of the stone road with its body. That's how the man's short life ended, or so he thought. After a while, in front of the gaze of the guy who was recently hit by a bus, there was a beautiful view of how the sun's rays filtered through the clouds. Such an environment was disconcerting. Where was he? What's going on around him? Why did he wake up here? Because just recently, he definitely died under the weight of a bus. In a space that was surrounded by clouds everywhere, a solar halo appeared right in front of the guy, in the center of which stood a female image. Most likely, the voice wondering if he was awake belonged to this person. The deceased soul thought about who was standing in front of him, but his thoughts were confirmed by the girl herself, who said that she was an observer, that she was looking out for the galaxy, or as it was more customary to call her, the goddess. The soul inquired about the reason for her being here. Confirmation of his death came immediately, but the goddess also informed that the deceased were given 3 options for further developments. The first option is for the soul to go to heaven. The second is for the soul to return to Earth, but in a different body. The third option is for your soul to be reborn in another world. Although the soul was confused, the goddess herself was clearly in too much of a hurry, which led to some reflections. The voiced thoughts made the girl smile and agree. After all, she could really be a little impatient. The deceased soul asked the goddess if she could answer any of her questions and received her consent. After all, she is facing a goddess. Then the soul decided to find out what kind of other world awaits it when choosing the third option. The goddess smiled and began her story. Arttoria is a fantastic world rich in natural resources, filled with 108 labyrinths with treasures, where you can go in groups for amazing adventures. When residents turn 5 years old, baptism takes place, during which special abilities are acquired, blessings. But everything is not so smooth. The world is inhabited by dangerous monsters, and there is class inequality. After listening to the goddess of the soul, I realized that in his previous life, he went in search of a new hobby. But if he reincarnated in the same world, he was unlikely to find anything. So the soul informed the goddess that he would go to another world. Spreading her arms, the goddess smiled gently again and accepted the choice of the deceased soul. The goddess also said that she can bestow on the soul any abilities, any power that she desires. Nevertheless, the soul refused such a generous offer, because a special power will lead to unnecessary conflicts and envy, and he does not need it. But he wouldn't give up a healthy body. With such words, the soul surprised the goddess. After their conversation, the soul wondered if the goddess always communicates with souls, to which she clearly replied that she does this very rarely. This soul was an exception, because when she was 5 years old, she saved a kitten that was her descendant, and the goddess wanted to somehow thank the savior with a personal meeting. Having understood the story of the goddess of the soul, she noted that many are mistaken in saying that pity does not benefit others. Laughing a little, the goddess hoped that he would not continue to follow this judgment. Stretching out her hand to the formless light that personified the deceased soul, the goddess wished her to live a happy and bright life. Some time later, the clouds in the sky parted. The weather outside was clearly very good. The sun's rays descended on a small village with agricultural land. The wind was gently swaying the trees around a small stone house with windows closed with wooden shutters. Inside, a man and a woman were bent over a child's bed. The pretty girl smiled broadly and wished good morning to the baby lying in front of her, not forgetting to clarify how she felt. But the man with the beard, who called himself the father of the child, called his son cute. The boy stared open-mouthed at his new parents, whom he encountered when he opened his eyes. The smile that spread across his face was slightly inept and awkward. Delighted by her son's awkward smile, Emria folded her arms on her chest and invited Lark to take her son in his arms. The man did not refuse and noted that his son would grow up as strong as he was. While the parents were rejoicing at the behavior of their son, thoughts were spinning in his head that he had woken up as a baby. Yes, it was logical, but the lack of control over his body was clearly very uncomfortable. In a small house, which stood alone near a well-trodden road surrounded by a forest, the joyful laughter of a happy family could be heard. The deceased soul in this world was born under the name All. The baby's body follows its instincts. If hunger overcomes, the baby begins to cry regardless of thoughts, and if he is tired or full, he tends to sleep. It's not easy to be a baby. The baby's mother's name was Emria, a beauty with an angelic face. But most likely all mothers are the most beautiful. His father's name was Lark. Of course he's not bright, but he's better than a tyrant father. After spending a few days in a new body, All found out that his family are farmers, and because of the good harvest, his family will live peacefully in the near future. It also became known that in the Arttoria, farmers are mainly considered poor. But the most important thing was that the kid found out quite recently. One evening, the village was attracted by the voice of my mother, who noted that it was already getting dark. Holding her hands out in front of her, Emria said, "Light," and a small snow-white ball shone in her hands. All carefully watched the happy mother and father who were smiling after a successful spell, which now illuminated the whole house. That was the most important thing. There is magic in this world. In the head of the village, magicians appeared in the form of a woman or a man with a pointed hat on his head and a ball of magic in his hands. If he couldn't use magic, then there was no point in rebirth. Frowning discontentedly and staring at the burning ball of light, All began to wonder how to activate magic. He must urgently try to conjure something. It needed to be thought about. To use magic, a person must have some kind of resource. But right now, he didn't need to know what kind of resource it was. It's enough to feel it inside your body. Unexpectedly, due to a strong and apparently too intense thought process, the baby's body could not withstand such pressure, and the village immediately fell asleep. Sometime later, the village has already experienced many disastrous mistakes. As soon as he concentrated, he immediately blacked out. Nevertheless, the initial task of the body is sleep and food. But the village was not going to give up. Concentrating, All began to try to find the resource that was needed to use magic, and he finally succeeded. There was a small lump of energy in the center of his stomach. Although small, the village felt it. At that moment, the boy realized that he could now use magic using this energy. To do this, you just need to redirect it, and then... But one detail prevented the ingenious plans of the village. His body, striving for sleep. The seasons changed one after another. Winter is spring. It had been 6 months since he was born in the new world. But all this time, the boy could only eat, sleep, and practice magic. When will he grow up? But still, the practice bore fruit. Although All can't use magic, he has learned to feel it all over his body, although it is very exhausting. But progress. It's the best time to practice. Deciding to use an example of how his mother cast the spell Light, All concentrated and silently recited the spell. Unfortunately, the child's body could not stand such tension and just did its natural thing, making the baby blush. The village's mother smiled happily and came to help her son change his diaper. It is expected that nothing worked out. Well, the boy did not expect that it would be easy, so he decided that since he had a lot of time, he would just continue in the same spirit and would not give up. Morning, afternoon, evening, night. Al tried to use the light spell, but nothing happened. Why he couldn't do anything the boy didn't understand. Then he decided that it might not be worth repeating after his mother and just imagined a brighter light, like from an LED lamp. The answer was close enough. The boy did not need to copy his mother. He just needed to imagine how an object from his past life performs the necessary actions. I wonder if he's the only one with such a cheating ability. But it doesn't matter anymore. Now he could use magic. All smiled happily and held up a small fist in a victorious gesture. Now the little village needed only practice. If you practice, the magic supply should also increase. Imagine the action of the cooler from the baby's hands. A small storm broke out. Even if he began to understand the principle by which his magical abilities work, he still has to do something first. The little village stretched happily and yawned, and slowly fell asleep. After all, he was just a baby. The baby's mother went into the room and noted that it was suspiciously cool there. It's been 5 years. The little village had grown noticeably, and his mom and dad were eagerly preparing for his baptism. It's hard to forget about such an event. Happily waving to his parents, Owl said goodbye and set off on his way. Today, all children who have reached the age of 5 will undergo the rite of baptism, which was a kind of greeting and receiving mercy from God. In this world, the blessing literally decides the fate of people. Indeed, in all the variety of gifts, a person can receive both a weak force and so strong that he can build a country from scratch. Nevertheless, all believe that any blessing is not considered useless, but rather a pleasant bonus to everyday life. Because of such thoughts, the boy was not particularly worried. It all reminded him of gacha games from his world. A short girl with a high smile greeted the village. It was Mirai. She became one of the main character's first friends since childhood, and she also lived next door to him. Although the girl was a year older, she was like a younger sister to the village. They played with each other 3 times a week, and now, when they meet, they smile happily at each other, holding hands. The children stood not far from the local church and began to discuss that today was finally the day of the baptism of the village, which he had been waiting for a very long time. As it turned out, Mirai didn't just come to meet the boy. She came to tell him something important. This slightly surprised the village. His childhood friend informed him that he should try not to tell anyone about his blessing, although the village knew about it. But after laughing with the girl, he said that he did not know that it was not worth talking about. Deciding to continue the game of Dono, the boy asked why it was impossible to talk about his blessing. Most likely, Mirai was not ready for such a question because she probably did not know why herself. Embarrassed even more by the unexpected question, the girl screamed that she couldn't, and that was it. The reasons are simple. In order to avoid shame, as well as excessive pride among children, it was decided not to talk about their powers. The weather was still nice and sunny outside, and a baptism ceremony was taking place inside a small church. The priest was standing next to the altar, but all was standing in front of him with one knee bowed. Rising from his knees after greeting, the boy with blonde hair raised his head to the priest, who hoped that he was ready for the ceremony, to which the village asked him to start. Raising his hand to the boy's head, the priest said that may the mercy of the Creator God come with him, and his hand was flooded with a bright shimmer. The small body of the village was flooded with bright light. There was a feeling that every part of his body was saturated with unknown power. His body was still wrapped in a bright shimmer, and the boy himself felt the power spreading through his body. I wonder if this is a blessing? Closing his eyes, all tried to focus on the new sensations. He saw the name of his ability. It was manifesting in his mind. Unexpectedly, the name popped up in my mind. Moderation. A mute question froze on the village's face. He was confused. He wanted to ask the priest a question, but he remembered that no one should be told about the blessing. The blessing that the hero received rather described him from a previous life. Because of such thoughts, all thought that perhaps the goddess hated him. Tears were rolling down the blonde's cheeks. The boy was sure that anyone would be grateful for such a blessing, but only the sweat of his heart flowed from his eyes. It was only as the years passed that the boy realized how useful his was. Joyfully returning home, the first thing All decided to do was inform his parents that he had finally received his blessing. Having met their son with happy smiles, his parents decided to cook a festive dinner in honor of such a joyful event. Squatting down, Lark patted his son's cap and said that he should remember that every blessing is useful in its own way. Laughing merrily, his father said that no matter what blessing his son received, he should be proud of this gift. But for some reason, these words sounded like consolation to the village. Some time later, a flock of birds flew over the crowns of the trees, behind which the Rocky Mountains were hidden, and in the very center of the forest stood a short boy. Concentrating on his inner feelings in the hands of the village, a clot of magical power formed, which after the words "wind bullet" broke the tree that was in front of his eyes. Delighted with the result, Al came to the conclusion that he had finally fully added wind magic to his achievements in addition to the magic of fire, water, space, lightning, earth, and ice. After looking at the fragments of wood left after the magic, the boy reported that his magic had become much more powerful, but he was much less exhausted from using it. Still, his training from infancy was not in vain. Delighted with the results achieved, Al did not plan to stop there, but decided to continue training, but with magic, which he needed for his ideal life. The boy was thinking for a very long time about what it was possible to compare the attribute that he needed, and then he remembered about his waste bag. All he had to do was introduce her. After concentrating and saying space for objects, a crevice appeared in front of the village with a completely empty space inside. Delighted with the unexpected but successful result, the boy decided to test the space and put a stick in it. It immediately disappeared as soon as she touched the crevice. The job was done perfectly. Now our hero had a storage space in which time passed in an unusual way for us. The things that will be stored there will always be fresh. Returning home after fruitful training in the village, I met a densely set table with a bunch of different dishes. It was all there. And buns, and meat, and, of course, do not forget about vegetables. Such an amount of food made the boy admire, and his mother informed him that today they have fried whalebird meat for dinner, and he can safely eat as much as he wants. The whalebird is a weak monster that lives everywhere, but even so, it takes at least 3 to cope with it. Its meat is very valuable among farmers and tastes like chicken. The boy shared the recipe for cooking this meat with his mother a year ago. He just asked if it would be tastier to roll the meat in breadcrumbs and then fry it in oil, and his mother managed to cook everything the first time. Unfortunately, there were no condiments like soy sauce in this world. The only thing here is salt. It's a pity, of course, that Al couldn't taste his favorite chicken, but he set himself the goal of developing all these seasonings in this world. In the house where our hero lived, there was always freshly baked bread and vegetables because his family was engaged in their cultivation, so these products have always been filled with love. The buns are made with homemade yeast, and Amria promised that when her son brings the bride to the house, she will teach her the recipe for making their family bread. Having started the meal, the father and son, almost in unison, began to praise the culinary abilities of their wife and mother, to which she was only a little embarrassed and offered to add additives. The house of the village has always been filled with laughter and joy, and today was no exception. After finishing the meal, the boy plopped down on the bed and began to wail that although he was a growing organism, it was still worth knowing the measure. If only he could use magic that activates the work of cells, removing malignant substances, the one that cures diseases. Healing. After using the spell, the heaviness in his stomach disappeared as if he had been to hot springs. After that, you could go to bed. The village did not have time to fully immerse itself in sleep. He heard his parents' anxious conversations that this year could be quite difficult for them due to crop diseases. The worried voices of parents continued to be heard outside the door, making plans for how they would survive this winter. Al's father decided to hunt monsters to earn money for the winter, which was a very dangerous idea. Emria anxiously let her head go down and asked her husband what would happen to them if one day he did not return from hunting. The next morning, the village went out into the field and got bored with its own thoughts. Still, children should not listen to such conversations because they will not be able to do anything. But this did not mean that the boy would be inactive. Remembering yesterday's spell, the blonde decided to try to apply it on wheat sprouts. His entire body and wheat sprouts were covered with a light glow after using the spell. A little embarrassed by the name, the village noted that there was no point in thinking about it. Although he was not sure that he would succeed, but with a good outcome, it would be possible to earn money from it. A long-haired girl was walking along the path in the direction of her friend's house, cheerfully humming something to herself. Noticing the familiar silhouette of Myrelle, she shouted her friend's name and abruptly stopped in the middle of a sentence. When she saw what her friend was doing, the girl instinctively hid behind the house in admiring amazement and began to wonder if it was magic. How does the village use it? Looking out from behind Myrelle's house in frustration, she caught herself asking a very strange question. And why does Al use magic in her family's fields? With a sense of accomplishment, the village collapsed onto the fields, which were quite soft and stretched joyfully. Although he was able to heal Paul and his girlfriend's family, he was clearly tired and hungry. Memories of last night's dinner made Al smile. Nevertheless, animal protein is necessary for a growing body, but farmers cannot often afford it. These thoughts made the boy stand up. After our hero took a sitting position, he once again voiced his desire to eat meat. These thoughts will obviously lead to strange consequences. The beast, somewhat resembling a boar but with strange mushrooms on its back, was leisurely strolling through the forest, not even assuming that a pair of tiny eyes was closely watching it. The wild boar is an animal whose size reaches up to 2 meters. The meat of these animals is quite tasty, but the great value lies in the mushrooms growing on their back and head. These mushrooms are considered a delicacy. In the little head of the newly born hunter, only thoughts of delicious meat were spinning. He even immediately decided that his mother would also be happy with such a prey, even though her son would have to go to the murder. The most important thing in hunting is strategy. You can't use fire or lightning magic because you can burn the whole forest and water or ice will spoil the taste of meat. Such a choice should be approached wisely. Therefore, the choice was obvious. Using the windmill, All instantly took the life of his prey, which only managed to grunt long. Delighted with the result, the boy decided that wind magic was best suited for hunting. Approaching his prey, the boy decided that first he needed to cut the mushrooms and then wash the blood with magic. Sighing heavily, All was surprised that he remained calm after the incident and simply decided that he had managed to adapt to the structure of his new world. At first glance, the boy could only roughly estimate the weight of his prey, which was about 500 kilos. After such an assessment, thoughts came to mind about how he would explain to his mother that he had defeated a huge forest boar. Smiling frivolously at his thoughts, the young hunter decided that there was no point in hiding and he could just tell it like it is. Unfortunately, the boy's optimism faced a harsh reality. His mother looked at him with withering eyes after the shocking news. Sitting on his lap, All listened to a lecture about how his parents would worry if something happened to him. His mother even remembered how often she warned him to stay away from monsters. Having changed her anger to mercy, Emeria praised her son for an honest confession of his deed and asked him not to hide anything from now on and listen when his mother says that it is dangerous somewhere and it is not worth going there. Surprised by the unexpected change in his mother's condition, All smiled guiltily and, agreeing with his mother, asked her for forgiveness. Smiling all over her face, Emeria touched her son's small nose with the tip of her finger and said that he had scared her very much, and it would be better if he did not do that anymore. Having finished conducting educational conversations, the woman drew attention to the booty brought by her son and offered to deal with it. The table was bursting with a lot of food again, but the main dish of the day was wild boar meat, which directly exuded juices flowing onto the plate. Happily eating the cooked dishes, Owl noted that people did not cheat about the taste of mushrooms. The soup from them turned out delicious, and the boar meat was very tasty even without salt. During dinner, Lark decided to raise a very important question about when his son learned to do magic. Not expecting such a question from his father, All simply said that these skills appeared from the moment he received the blessing. Still, such an answer did not arouse any suspicions. Lark just decided that his son had a blessing. Closing this question too quickly, All noted to himself that he had now found an excuse for his magic. Yet the essence of the blessing, except for himself, no one else knows. Although the first question was closed very quickly, another stream flowed on. My father asked if he liked magic, what he needed it for. For some reason, these questions confused the village itself. After all, he never thought about why he needed magic, but he firmly decided that he would use it to become richer and live a carefree and happy life. After laughing at his son's answer, Lark apologized for the strange questions, and then switched to a more serious tone and asked his son to remember. The man's face became too serious, and then he said that if the village relies only on force and uses it to harm others, then this is akin to a bad deed. Abruptly changing his face, the big man smiled and again admired the cooked dinner, and the mother of the village, who joined the conversation, asked to eat until the food was cold. This change only made the boy put another piece of deliciously cooked food in his mouth. Night had already descended on the village, but our hero's small head was filled with thoughts that perhaps he was too carried away with using magic and might someday turn down the wrong path. And yet, All was glad that he was born into a family with loving parents, because in his previous life, he and his parents had a rather strained relationship. It's so nice to live in a loving family. Happily turning over on the other side, the boy thought that perhaps the goddess had a hand in this too, and an image of a girl appeared in his head who, smiling happily, demanded more gratitude. After a while, the parents' words turned out to be true. The fields in the whole village were struck by the disease, and many farmers were left without crops. This fate did not affect only the family of All and his girlfriend, Mireille. Still, the village liked doing magic. But do not forget that he is still a farmer, and it's time to learn about farm life, so that he can grow seasonings in his field. Happily closing his eyes from pleasant memories, the boy scrolled through in his head the desire to make soy sauce, miso paste, and most importantly, sugar. One day, eager to grow sugar beet or sugarcane, the village informed his parents that he wanted his own field. Thinking about her son's request, the girl remembered about the unfurnished garden, and then the boy enthusiastically asked if he could use it, and after permission thanked him with a smile on his face. Although the boy was burning with unhealthy enthusiasm at the very beginning of his venture, the sight of the abandoned garden clearly diminished him. After examining the range of work, the boy resentfully thought that this was clearly not the best place for a 5-year-old child to develop, but decided that most likely his mother did not suspect that he would take it seriously. Having gathered himself and told himself that it was too early to lose heart, All noted to himself that such situations were created for the use of magic. So after these thoughts, a wind cutter went into action with a thin blade cutting the grown grass. More impressive spells went into action next: levitation, which allowed trees to be almost uprooted from the ground; the tremor of the earth, which removed unnecessary irregularities. After some time, the village collapsed back, breathing heavily and looking around contentedly at what he had managed to do in the time past. After that, the boy completely fell to the ground, wailing how tired he was. Still, using so much magic clearly consumes a lot of magical powers. However, the fact that our hero got such a result with the help of magic only proves that he has achieved great heights, and if he continues to develop, he'll become even stronger in the future. After finishing his rest, the young farmer grabbed a hoe in his hands, which was clearly not inferior to him in size, and immediately decided to proceed to the next stage, actively starting to implement the next part of the plan. The village happily thought that tinkering in the ground was one of the best parts of a farmer's job. To begin with, you need to weed the land, clearing it of weeds, and after that you can occupy yourself with sowing seeds on the ground. And at this, the joyful stream of thoughts of the village was interrupted. Seeds? Such a simple word suddenly threw the young boy into a stupor. He completely forgot that in order to sow the earth, you need to have seeds. Returning home, the first thing the future farmer did was go to his father to find out if it was possible to get sugar beet seeds in this world at all. Lark answered his son's question quite clearly. These are well-known seeds, but there was not a single farmer in their kingdom who could grow it. This surprised the boy. Hearing his father's answer, Al was upset because his plan was already beginning to fail, although he did not even try to start. Seeing the disappointment of his only son, Lark decided to inform Tom that soon traders from another country would come to them and maybe he would be able to find these seeds. These words gave hope to the young heart again. Merchants. Even if they do not have seeds, the village can always ask that they be extracted for it and brought next time. His father immediately decided to inform him that often the goods of such merchants are not cheap and they may not be able to afford them. But this did not stop the boy because he goes there not only for seeds, but also to listen to stories about adventures. Patting his flighty son on the head, Lark said that he would definitely go with his son to the merchants. So night fell on the village, and the next day the lively village decided that if he did not have money, it did not mean that he would not be able to find something as an exchange for seeds. Nuts, medicinal herbs, mushrooms from wild boars are all goods that are highly valued by merchants. But his goal today was different. Nevertheless, the village loves meat very much. The tree deer is a deer-like monster that has the highest rank among the inhabitants of their forest. His horns are used in the creation of medicines, and they are quite expensive. Standing in the middle of the forest and using detection magic from under the feet of the village, thin lines filled with magical power began to disperse. They spread throughout the forest. This spell created lines, circles, intersecting at many points, and was just created to search for prey. With this spell, you can sense the presence of all living beings. This magic is similar to the action of an echo sounder. Catching even the slightest fluctuations from my spell, I still can't find a tree deer in the vicinity. Is there really nothing worth seeing nearby? But then the magician sensed a wild boar. Deciding not to waste time on deepening the search, the boy went in the direction of the forest boar. He would deal with him first and then continue his search for the deer. The familiar sounds of birds chirping and insects chirping could be heard in the forest. The wind stirred the crown slightly, and in the very wilderness of the forest, the young hunter watched his unsuspecting prey. After a short search, the village managed to find a boar, but the boy was slightly confused, hiding behind a tree. What was he doing? Did you sleep? It felt like the boar wasn't moving at all. To make sure of what was happening, it was necessary to get closer to the boar. After taking a couple of steps, the village's eyes widened in shock. A huge brown bear, which was clearly a rare guest in their forest, decided to have a meal with the boar chosen by the village. It was a hidden bear. A hidden bear is a monster that looks similar to a bear, but usually does not live in the forest. He lives in the mountains, has a long body, is quite aggressive, and can also destroy an entire village, but it is difficult to detect them. Since the bear was busy with his dinner now, there was a chance to defeat him. It was enough just not to come out of hiding and suddenly strike. Abruptly jumping out of hiding, all shouted. Windbreaker and 2 wind blades abruptly flew out of his hands, which cut through all obstacles on the way to the goal. Contrary to expectations, the bear managed to notice the boy, which shocked the second one. With his paws in the form of a cross in front of him, the bear was preparing to take a blow. The impact only created small streams of wind around the bear. He blocked it. This made all think about how dense his skin is, whether he feels magic. The bear, angered by the interrupted dinner, growled angrily. Developing high speed, the monster rushed towards the boy through the trees. As long as the distance between the bear and the young hunter is large enough, there is a chance to find a solution. If the bear catches the village, then he will have to say goodbye to his life. This arrangement clearly did not suit him. Placing his hands on the ground, the magician raised a stone wall in front of him. The wall did not become a strong barrier in the way of the bear. After the first blow, cracks appeared on the wall. The village was in shock. The wall was made of clay and concrete about 50 centimeters thick, and the bear broke through it so easily. It was very important to calm down now. After all, the village could do this, and it is possible to defeat an opponent filled with anger with simple tricks. With a furious roar, the bear broke through the wall built in front of him, and at the same second, the village activated a new spell, Pit, which deprived the beast of support under its paws. Crashing down with a heavy carcass, the monster still let out long-drawn growls, and the village was preparing to create a new spell. A waterfall and a strong stream of water fell on the pit into which the bear had recently fallen. It would hardly be possible for a person to escape from such a thing. The monster just started floundering in the water, but clearly remained alive. And at the end of his battle, all used a rockfall. There were no sounds under the collapsed stones, and silence fell. Now the bear will definitely not escape. He might have just drowned in the pit, but it was better to act for sure. With such thoughts, All put his cap back on. Exhaling heavily and tiredly, the boy realized the danger he had just encountered. His strength was literally at its limit, and then he decided that it was too early for him to fight such opponents. Although the bear was a dangerous opponent, it remains a valuable commodity. Therefore, the village took out its trophy from under the rubble and removed all the blood from the body. The boy still returned home alive. But he couldn't escape from his own mother's fate, because there was a bear carcass lying behind him. A very dangerous bear. Although Emria was worried about her son, she could still objectively assess his abilities. The parents discussed among themselves that it was already luck to get out of the fight with the monster in one piece, and only adventurers of rank C and higher could defeat it. After hearing this conversation, the boy concluded that his magic power was roughly comparable to the C rank of adventurers, although he did not even know whether it was high or low. Returning their attention to the defeated monster, the parents noted that the condition of the skin was excellent and it was possible to make good money on it. Rich people can give a lot of money to make a stuffed animal out of this skin, or make a cloak with high stealth rates. In general, any part can be used for something other than meat. It's too smelly. Happily jumping up, All asked if he had enough money for sugar beet seeds after selling the skin, and his father replied that there would still be money left. The boy smiled at his father and informed him that he would give the remaining money to his parents. This caused a smile on the man's face, and words of gratitude escaped. A stern female voice joined in this joyful idyll, which informed the boy that his mother was still angry and their conversation was not over yet. Night was slowly falling on the village. The hunt was fruitful today, and the boy had enough money to buy seeds, and perhaps he could find something else from the merchants. Waiting for tomorrow was very exciting. The morning of the following day turned out to be very stormy. The bells did not stop ringing for the whole village, and the farmers in the fields were already engaged in plowing the field. Not only did the bells create noise, but also the merchants who arrived at the square and prepared goods. All and his father watched the guests, and then headed in their direction, greeting one of them. A man with long hair and clothes that clearly did not match this place greeted an old friend, and their conversation immediately took a business-like form. The usual purchase of seeds, as well as a request in the evaluation of the product. The man shifted his gaze slightly to the side and was very surprised that by prey the farmer meant the carcass of a bear sitting on a cart. Lark smiled at his old friend and began to tell a fictional story that the bear fell into some kind of trap and breathed his last in it. And he accidentally found it. The merchant stared at the monster thoughtfully. An obvious lie. The hidden bear is too smart and cunning to just fall into the trap of ordinary hillbillies. But what is the reason for such a blatant lie? The merchant turned his head and his gaze fell on the little boy. Catching someone else's gaze, all only smiled radiantly, not suspecting what the merchant was thinking. For some reason, the boy seemed strange to the trader and immediately suggested that he was the one who caught such a unique prey. But could a child catch such a monster? Well, actually, the trader did not want to delve into this, and Lark would not have been able to steal loot from someone, so there was no point in refusing the deal. After thinking it over, the merchant said that the carcass was of excellent quality. There was no severe damage, which means that almost anything can be used, and he would like to buy it by offering 100 gold. This amount surprised the young village. No one in this village had any gold coins, and if you convert them into yen, it would be 10,000 per coin. The idea that he could get 1,000,000 yen for one bear excited the boy. If he keeps hunting, he'll get rich fast. In the dreams of the village, piles of gold coins were already falling on him from the sky. The flow of admiring thoughts of the village was interrupted by his father, who asked Lebrant not to fool around and reminded him that he had been buying from him for a long time. The merchant awkwardly ran that Lark could not be deceived, and the latter, saying that although he was poor, he was not a fool and knew how much such a carcass cost, grinned angrily. Having given up under the pressure of the farmer, Lebrant put 2 bags of gold on the table and said that 170 gold was the maximum he could give for a bear. Surprised that he had just been almost deceived, all decided that he should familiarize himself with the market prices of goods in this world. Otherwise, he would continue to make easy money without really knowing their prices. Glaring angrily at the merchant, the boy noted to himself that next time he would not be so easily fooled, and his father completed the transaction. As soon as Lark mentioned the sugar beet seeds, all's eyes shone. The merchant was surprised that they were looking for unusual sugar beet seeds and noted that this was a very unusual request. But nevertheless, he began to search together that there should be 1 bag and that the farmer was going to start growing a rare vegetable. Few people managed to grow it. Lark just said it was his son's idea. Taking out the coveted bag, Lebrant said that he would take 20 gold pieces for one of them, although it was expensive. But the village that got what it wanted had already disappeared from this world, and Lark and the merchant continued to inspect the goods. After thinking a little, the man turned to his son with the question, would he like to buy something else, and received an instant answer that his son needed a knife. For a hunter, a knife is a necessary thing. It will be needed when cutting an animal, skinning, cooking, and also if the village runs out of magic, it can use it for self-defense. Turning slightly pale, Lark said that his wife would be very upset if he bought it, imagining the consequences in all colors. But his son's shining eyes were weapons of mass destruction. Lebrant clearly had a very strong grip on the merchant. He immediately offered his customers several options for knives that could suit them. Having failed to choose the village, he announced that he wanted everything. This surprised his father, but the sparkling gaze did not allow him to refuse. One of the conditions of the purchase was not to tell his wife about it. Nevertheless, she is terrible in anger, and both men of the family have experienced it for themselves. After buying the knives, the boy's father said that he still needed to talk about something with the merchant, who in turn suggested that the young farmer look around more. Walking between the gathered people and inspecting the goods, the village's gaze caught on one thing. He was obviously surprised to see it here. Looking at the available goods in surprise, the cheeks of the village turned slightly pink from the rush of happiness and excitement. And that's how the trip to the square to the merchants ended. The pouch and the clay pot were filled to the brim. There was no doubt it was soybeans and yeast. For some reason, the merchant gave the yeast away for free, but thank him for that. With this, I can make soy sauce and miso. Closing his eyes, Owl said to himself that the highlight of today's program, and without restraining his emotions, he said aloud that it was sugar beet. In this world, sugar costs a lot of money, and the way it is made is kept secret. Farmers can only dream about it. Chuckling, the boy remembered that even Lebrant did not have it on sale. But our hero was not going to tolerate this state of affairs. He wants sweets. Donuts, cookies, muffins, all of it. Sugar beet is a common vegetable from the root vegetable family. In fact, it is quite simple to grow it following some tricks. First, you need to take care of the beds. Beetroot will spoil if part of it is watered, so you need to provide a way for excess water to drain. Not only water from the surface can be a problem, but groundwater too. In addition, beets are sensitive to acidic soil, so rice husks and shells should be used for fertilization. Observing these subtleties, the beetroot will quickly begin to grow. Proudly gathering a bunch of magic in his hands, all thought that since it exists in this world, then it also needs to be applied. What happens if you use magic to accelerate growth? Pointing his hand towards the plowed beds, Owl cast a spell and a clot of magic began to spread to the entire garden. Small sprouts appeared from the ground at first, and then they grew to medium size. The spell worked. Beetroot has taken root well in this land. Deciding to use magic to further improve the taste of beetroot, Owl once again activated his magical powers. Next, it was necessary to deal with watering. Just a small experiment can be carried out. The young farmer decided to pour one part of the beetroot with water that was created with the help of magic, but the other with ordinary water from the well. And then he will have to observe which water will contribute to growth. The experiment was not particularly successful. Still, if you use a lot of magic, it hinders growth. But combining magic and conventional methods improves the result. Someday the village will be able to make high-quality sugar. From these thoughts and images of sweet desserts, his face broke into a blissful smile and salivation flowed from his mouth. In the evening of the same day, the whole family of farmers rejoiced at the money they had earned for the bear, because it could help them survive this winter. After the joyful news about the money received, Lark asked his son if he liked the trip to the merchants and received instant enthusiastic consent and told his mother what he had acquired. For some reason, after the story, the village's mother began to persistently ask about the fact that her son had bought more besides the seed. Her eyes were twinkling suspiciously. The boy turned pale from such pressure and began to mumble some unsuccessful excuses, but his father handed over his son with guts, telling his wife about the purchase of 4 knives. Yet his father did not possess not only the ability to remain silent, but apparently also to think. In the suspended atmosphere, a very angry and insistent voice sounded, pronouncing the names of All and Lark. Although the woman's smile was sparkling and seemingly angelic, but the tone that voiced the question of what it all meant clearly betrayed her anger. There was nothing left but to beg for mercy on his knees. All decided to show the beans purchased from the merchants to his childhood friend, who was now watching with interest the strange beans in the boy's hands. Staring with interest at her friend of virginity, Morel asked what he had in his hands. Ordinary beans? All willingly told the little girl that these are soybeans and they are delicious in any form, and they are stored for a long time. After soaking the soy in plenty of water, cook over low heat until it becomes soft. After dumping into a colander and mash evenly, and then the resulting mash should be mixed with yeast and salt. When the whole process is completed, the mass just needs to be postponed until the evening. Morel was delighted with her friend's knowledge and only admired what he was doing. The village has magically raised the temperature in the room to 60 degrees. Otherwise, the whole process will be delayed for a period of 2 weeks. Morel, clearly interested in the process of what the boy was trying to do, began asking him questions which surprised him very much. Waving her arms enthusiastically, the girl with long hair began to tell in colors how the shine came from the hands of the village. What is now? What was then on her family's field? Confused by such pressure, the boy was surprised that someone saw him then and noted to himself that he was not careful. Still, it's easy enough to do business with children. All mentioned that he had seen a flower field in the forest, and Myrell immediately switched to a more exciting event than the glitter from the boy's hands. Thus, the young magician had to lead his girlfriend into the forest to the very flower field. Although he felt guilty for his actions, he understood that explaining something would be extremely troublesome. He just apologized to himself. That evening, 2 children who lived next door opened a clay pot, inside of which there was a dense brown substance, miso. Stirring his culinary masterpieces, all said that the recipe should be further refined, but it turned out not bad for the first time. But Myrell was interested in whether it was edible because she had not seen anything like it yet. Taking a spoon with a prepared mass from the pot, all fried it over low heat and then added vegetables and offered the ready-made substance to his girlfriend for a sample. The girl reluctantly grimaced, not ready to try something new, but still took a bite. At the same moment, her face lit up. The childish eyes were full of delight. What she tasted was very tasty, no, incomparably delicious, just amazing, divine. This reaction made the boy laugh. Al put aside half of the harvested mass to his girlfriend and told her that it could be diluted with water and then make soup, or used for marinating meat, or simply fried with fish. After saying goodbye to Myrell, the boy was lost in thought. The first seasoning that the young farmer made was miso. If he continues to extract new ingredients, he will be able to make more delicious spices. If he has soy now and sugar will be available soon, then he can try to make soy sauce, and he would like to cook meat with teriyaki sauce. But it's still a long way off. In order to make teriyaki sauce, you need sugar and mirin. The issue with sugar has been resolved in general. But how to make mirin is a question. In theory, mirin can be replaced with alcohol or honey, because in fact, mirin is a sweet rice wine that is used only in cooking. In this case, it will be easiest to get honey. Honey may be found in the forest, but perhaps the search for ingredients should be postponed for now. Night descended on the village, but the village set goals for itself so as not to stop there. The morning that came was no different from the usual one. More precisely, it seemed so. Al went downstairs and, sleepily rubbing his eyes, wished everyone a good morning. He was greeted by the amazingly joyful voice of his mother, whose face was beaming with happiness, and there was clearly an unhealthy gleam in her eyes, but his father looked a little strange. The boy noticed that his mother had obviously slept very well today, to which she said that it was her beloved son's early sleep that affected her so much. Lately, Imria has been insisting that her son go to bed early. Maybe the boy really looks too tired. In contrast to him, his mother looks even more beautiful. Maybe it's the new cosmetics? In fact, the tired father who flashed at the table gave a very eloquent answer. Still, the option with cosmetics had to be discarded because there is not even a bathtub in this house. Bath. The word hung like a crushing weight on the boy's shoulders. After completing all the morning procedures and gathering, all enthusiastically made a plan to build a bath during the day. I wonder why the idea of building a bath did not come to Al's mind earlier. Maybe it was because no one in the village had it. Nevertheless, a clear plan was needed for the construction. It was decided to use a tree as a basis. The bathtub should be more spacious and comfortable than usual. But the thought of a warm bath caused a strange, contented peace on his face. So having built a clear plan, Al strengthened his body with magic, and then began to chop down trees with the help of the wind. Dig a hole using earth magic. Build the main frame, then the walls and ceiling. And after all the efforts, the bath was ready. This is a success. The tub came out spacious, but not too big. Also, our young master dug a channel so that the water from the bath would flow out calmly, applied water-repellent magic so the tree would not rot. The village even took care to build a hall with a locker room. Although there were only basic things there such as a closet, a rug, and a couple of towels found somewhere with a laundry basket. Admiring his creation, the boy thought that because of the use of magic, the process took extremely little time and perhaps he would have problems later. But now it was clearly not important. The young master was distracted from admiring the built premises by someone's voice, who asked what kind of shack it was. Those voices belonged to Emria and Lark. Apparently, the older members of the family came to ask what their son was so hard at. First of all, the father asked if the village had built this place itself and, after receiving confirmation, began to admire his son's talent, which was then picked up by his mother, asking if she could see what was inside. Perhaps it was because the bathtub had just been built, but everything was shining inside. Surprisingly, Lark immediately realized that it was a bathtub. The boy only confirmed his father's guesses by saying that the Holy Father had told him about it, after putting his parents out the door of the shack with the words that he finally wants to take a bath. All immersed his baby body in warm water. In the warm water, from which thick steam was coming, the boy felt as if he had been born again and did not regret in the least that he had spent time on it. But an admiring voice prevented his solitude. Lark and Emria entered the tub admiring its luxury and lamenting that they had never thought that working on a farm they would be able to visit such a place. The appearance of his father and mother made the boy very surprised. He began to ask questions about why they had undressed and logically assumed that they had decided to join him in the bathroom. Unconvincing indignation did not stop the two adults, and they, saying that they were one family, plunged into the bathroom with their outraged son. Although after that almost all the hot water was poured out. Relaxing in the warm water, Lark said that the bath was just something and it felt like all the fatigue was draining from him. Emria supported him and said that it would be good to take her every day. The woman turned to her son with this question. For some reason, her voice sounded slightly threatening, but the smile sparkling on her face clearly did not bode well. The boy tensed. Panic froze in the boy's eyes. Still, his mom's smile was very frightening, and what had just been said was clearly a hint that no one had forgotten about hunting a hidden bear. In order to avoid any damage, I had to say that if his parents want, they can spend bath days from time to time. Having already smiled really sweetly at his son, Emria said that he and his father love him very much. These words made the boy blush. Returning home towards night, the village was completely exhausted and slightly overheated in the bathtub because of this. His face still looked like a ripe tomato. The boy was very tired and already fit on his bed, but his parents seemed to have received another reserve of energy and exchanged all sorts of sweet phrases with each other. Wishing her son a good night and asking him to fall asleep quickly, Emria received in response that he was already sleepy after the bath. The next morning was slightly unusual again. Emria's face was glowing with happiness, but her skin seemed to have become even smoother. All began to suspect that perhaps he was missing something and something good was happening without him. But the sight of a tired father clearly inspired doubts. In the forest near the village, there was already a white-haired boy who was watching the scurrying insects with obvious interest. There was no doubt about it. They were definitely bees. A strange range of emotions blossomed on the boy's face at the realization of this thought. It seems to be happiness, but with a clear element of displeasure. He had finally found them. That's the reason for the presence of a small dissatisfaction. Apparently, the search for bees took quite a long time, but he finally found a hive. And if there is a beehive, then there is honey there. On closer inspection, it could be noted that the bees were slightly larger than in his world. But who cared? Thoughts of honey clouded All's mind, and he could no longer control not only his facial expression, but also his thoughts. Having formed a square barrier around the bees, isolating them from the outside world, the boy immediately used a fireball. Perhaps he wanted to get rid of the threat to his life in this way. Now, having locked the bees in the barrier in which the fire was burning, it remained only to wait, and after a while the magician's actions bore fruit. The bees began to fall to the ground without any movement. The smoke caused oxygen starvation, from which they all immediately died. When All came closer to examine the bees, he really noticed that the insects were gigantic. Maybe it wasn't bees, but monsters that looked like them. If that's the case, then the boy needs to be careful. Strange sounds broke up behind him, which forced him to turn around and look at its source. A huge hornet was flying in front of his face. One bee survived. For all that, she was bigger than the others. Could it be their queen? The boy watched the actions of the insect in front of him with fright. Nevertheless, he relaxed his vigilance. The bee stayed in the air for a little longer, and when its strength began to leave it, it descended to the ground with smooth movements, causing the boy's heart to contract. Yes, he had arranged all this just to get honey, but now he felt like some kind of monster. Unexpectedly for the village, a faint request for help rang in his head, which made him involuntarily widen his eyes. Looking at the weakened queen bee with a bit of guilt, he asked if she was trying to tell him something. His conscience had spoken earlier. Still, you need to fight the strong, not the weak. Listening to his conscience, Owl used healing magic. At first, the bee waved its wings uncertainly and then soared up, making a circle around the boy, apparently wanted to thank him. Smiling at the flying insect, the young magician was very glad that she felt better, because after all, he was to blame for what happened to her. Unexpectedly for the boy, the bee landed smoothly on his shoulder, clearly determined to continue the journey only in this way. After looking at the insect, All gently asked what her actions meant and whether it meant that she wanted to go with him, to which the bee actively nodded its muzzle. Raising a finger to his face, All thought about it. If his mom sees a bee, she'll probably get mad again, but if he offers something. After looking at the bee, the boy said that if she would produce honey from time to time, she could go with him. To this request, Bee nodded even more actively and with great enthusiasm. Thanking his new companion, the boy said that now she was his familiar and he was glad to meet her. For some reason, some kind of trusting feelings immediately arose between these two. Owl, looking at his new companion, wondered what name to give her. The queen bee is the queen bee. Abruptly deciding on a new name, he informed the bee that from now on she would be called Queen. The village received a reaction to the new name in the form of joyful wing waving. After standing a little longer at the place where he met a new friend, the boy decided to continue his hunting. The village has never met such a healthy boar. In front of him was a boar with strange crystals growing on it, and its entire body was covered with strange scars and cuts. It was definitely a monster, but they definitely don't live in their forest. Maybe he came down from the mountains in search of food? Well, it wasn't really important. We need to come up with a strategy. Owl was distracted from his thoughts by his new companion, who began to actively flap her wings. Taking this as a question of what he was doing, the boy said that he was thinking how to catch that boar. Then Quinn got into a fighting pose, and when asked if she wanted to help, she only rushed to the front with incredible speed, ignoring the village. Due to the speed of movement, Quinn was able to mislead the boar and in one quick but clear movement forced him to make an incomprehensible sound soaked in pain. With each movement, Queen's speed increased, and the blows to the boar became more accurate and apparently more painful. After a long series of powerful blows, the boar finally fell to the ground, and the bee waved its wings in a victorious pose right above it. She couldn't speak, but the pose clearly read, "See how I can." Joyfully running to meet her companion, all began to praise and thank her because what she did was really amazing. A happy smile spread more and more on the boy's face, and he continued to praise Quinn, who was glad to receive so much praise. But now he had to drag this boar home. Having finally reached home and laid his new prey on the empty space in front of the doors, the village heard from his father that he was again surprising them with his exploits. Previously, such ferocious monsters lived in the thicket of the forest and annoyed the villagers, which is why they had to hire adventurers. The boy's father said that most likely this guy came from the mountain, and he is very glad that his son returned unharmed. Emria had already begun to scold her son for his reckless behavior, but her face paled and she noted that something else was bothering her now. For example, a huge bee that flew behind the back of an embarrassed village and looked like a daughter-in-law who was clearly not expected in this house to meet. Looking at the pale mother, the boy said that this was his familiar and she did not bring any harm to people. He also said that it was Queen herself who defeated the monster. Deciding to come in with trumps so that the mother would not have a chance to refuse to leave the bee, Owl said that his familiar promised that she would make honey for us. Emria's face lit up at those words. Apparently the love of sweets is a distinctive feature of the whole family. Therefore, after hearing the promise to make honey, my mother immediately accepted a new companion into her house. It was a little confusing, although it was a little strange to receive such a reception, but All was clearly glad that his new friend was not exposed, and Quinn herself was pleased with this outcome. It was a small matter. It was necessary to build a house for the new tenant. Having collected everything necessary for the construction of the village, Murray and I went to the forest, which has already become a familiar place to work. Having measured and placed the honeycombs on the table with a slight knock under the pressure of 2 pairs of curious eyes, Owl was quite focused on his work. I heard a curious girly voice that was interested in what he was building this time. The boy said that this was a hive in which bees live and can produce a viscous liquid that was in a pot. Dipping her finger into this substance, Mireille tasted the contents and broke into a happy smile from the sweetness that spread across her mouth. Queen was the queen bee, so she could subdue bees of different species. So there were a lot of hives. Bees can make honey and protect residents from monsters, and mixing different types of honey only made it tastier. Having placed the hives on the ground, All was clearly pleased with his work and was already looking forward to what he could make from the honey that was extracted from the queen hive. So the boy decided to cook raw ham from honey from queen. To the cheers of his friends, the work began. There are many types of cured ham, but this time the choice was on pancetta. Although All had voiced it all, both of his companions had no idea what it was. Pancetta is translated from Italian as pork belly. It is also called raw salted bacon. The method of preparation consists in the fact that the first step is to cook the meat itself. Then cut the brisket into strips and leave it to marinate for a week, and then send it to wilt for 2 or 3 months. The most important thing for brisket is marinade or samri, which consists of water, salt, honey, onion, and garlic. All the ingredients need to be mixed in a saucepan, and after boiling, let it cool down. Thanks to the honey from Queen, the marinade will be special. Myreille, having learned that she would have to wait until the new dish was ready, was a little annoyed that they would not try it today. Smiling guiltily, All apologized and promised that he would cook a lot for the winter. After the brisket was marinated in the pan, it was placed in a barrier on which a cooler was placed for complete drying. And then All and Mireille said goodbye. Sitting down on the ground, the boy smiled happily at the thought that now he would always have honey at hand, and on New Year's Eve he would be able to eat brisket, and it was all thanks to Queen. The village lives the same leisurely and carefree life, and in the meantime, very soon it will be time to harvest sugar beet. After the beetroot is harvested, the boy will have both honey and sugar. Now sweets no longer seem like such an unattainable dream. After all, the day when he will be able to eat them is getting closer. It's finally time for the sugar beet harvest. Owl was already full of hope in the kitchen of his house and, together with Quinn, was preparing to make sugar. First of all, the beetroot must be peeled from the thick peel, cut into cubes of about 1 centimeter. After that, everything is thrown into hot water at a temperature of 70 degrees. After that, it is necessary to wrap the pan with a thick cloth and let it stand for about an hour, and later you need to take out all the pieces and return the pan to the fire to continue cooking the juice. Boil the juice for about an hour, removing excess foam from the surface. When the consistency becomes similar to syrup, you need to reduce the heat and continue cooking. After the consistency turns white, you need to put out the fire and continue mixing the adhesive mass until it hardens. What happened as a result of all the actions done should be put on a dry plate and everything is ready. The result was not exactly what the village expected, but not everything can be perfect the first time. After tasting the piece, the boy was convinced that it was sugar. But there were still a lot of impurities in it, and the sweetness was a little weak. Thinking about whether magic could purify sugar, the young chef began to scroll through in his head what it might look like and how to visualize it in his head. After thinking about it, an image of a washing machine formed in my head. You need to use the magic of water. Imagine the rotation. Extraction. The pieces of sugar that had been lying on the plate before were caught up by the water vortex. The vortex continued to swirl, and even now it was already noticeable how all the excess impurities were disappearing. Pulling the moisture out of the sugar as a result, 2 piles turned out. The sugar turned out to be perfect. The snow-white color somehow resembled a snowy mountain, and the taste became as it should have been. Due to the fact that the sugar beet harvest was quite good, the village had a lot of work to do to extract sugar, so the time flew by unnoticed. In his secluded corner where his peculiar workplace was located, a pile of clay pots grew on an empty square near a small house. There was sugar in each of these jars, but as the village prepared each jar, the taste only got better and brighter. Such reserves will be enough for him until next year. After winter, more beets will need to be planted, as there are still seeds left. With the amount that he has, he will be able to harvest 2 or 3 more times. Now, with sugar and honey, the village had everything it needed to make sweets. Due to the fact that he became one step closer to his dream, a happy smile lit up his face. Thinking why not try to cook something now, the young chef got to work. He decided to start with something simple. I kneaded the dough and lit the oven. After some time, all happily ran to his parents to treat them to his culinary delights. The boy did not specify what he had prepared, but noted that he really wanted to please his parents. The touched parents were very happy to hear such words from their son and began to hug him with love. Still, their son was a really wonderful boy. The happy parents, who were surprised to hold some round dough products in their hands, eagerly wanted to try what their son had cooked. Bringing the roundels to his mouth, there was a simultaneous crunch. Amazed at what they had just tried, both parents turned to their son with sparkling eyes. However, the behavior of his mother, who called him a boy, was a little confused. Although the woman's face was happy, but something in it was slightly frightening. But when asked what it was, all immediately replied that it was a kukai. Imria, with a happy smile on her face, asked her son if this was all that he had prepared and received the answer that the boy wanted to sell some of it to Mr. Lebrant. The frightened woman screamed that this could not be done in any case. Otherwise, there would be a fierce battle. The mother shamelessly continued to put small rounds of dough in her mouth and assured her son that she would take care of the remaining cookies. All was a little upset. Imria was curious to find out from her son how he found such a recipe. But the boy, smiling awkwardly, lied that this was a feature of his blessing, for which he definitely should due respect to the goddess. So the basket of cookies turned out to be empty very quickly, and hopes of selling them evaporated at the same speed. All 50 cookies that all cooked, his mother ate. Apparently, he did not fully appreciate the love of women for sweets. Although Mom seems happy now, for some reason the memories make me a little worried. Finally, the merchants came to the village again. The boy decided to present to Lebrant what he could make from sugar beet and what he had purchased from him last time. This will definitely be able to interest the merchant. Holding up a handful of sugar in the palm of his hand, Lebrant noted that he had never seen such snow-white sugar, but he immediately understood everything about honey. Although all did not know that those whom he killed in the forest at that time were killer bees, but the essence was correct. Lebrant immediately turned on his trading skills and decided to find out how much his new colleague was willing to sell. Without thinking twice, the answer came that there were about 20 cans of sugar and 10 barrels of honey. A slight business smile spread across the merchant's face, and he said with a light heart that he was buying everything that the boy had just offered him. It was difficult to expect such an outcome. Lebrant offered his prices for the goods: 5 gold pieces for sugar and 4 for honey. He even noted that he was ready to pay 5 silver coins on top for the quality of sugar. Owl, surprised by such a price, plunged back into his dreams of unprecedented riches, converting gold coins into the currency of his previous life. Suddenly the boy pulled himself together and, fixing his gaze on the merchant, asked if he was joking with him by chance. Such an abrupt change surprised the man. Smiling awkwardly and shrugging his shoulders, Lebrant made a note for himself that Lark's son could not be fooled and raised the fee for honey and sugar. Pleased with the results, the village took note of an effective way to influence the merchant. Although, in fact, Lebrant was a good man since he came to their village. He should be grateful for such a product. Thanking the man for the successful deal, the boy handed him a small basket saying that it was a small bonus for their cooperation. After looking at something unclear, the merchant immediately decided to clarify what it was. There is no point in hiding, so the village said that these are cookies that he made with sugar. As soon as the merchant took a bite, there was a crunch. The unexpectedly pleasant sweet taste caused a wave of surprise. The first thing the merchant asked the boy if he had baked himself and received a quick confirmation that he had. The reaction to the honest answer was too meager, which also led the village into slight confusion. He was clearly not prepared for such a drastic change in behavior. Lebrant was indeed a good merchant. He informed his new partner that he was ready to pay 1 gold piece for each basket of such cookies, if, of course, he had any left. This price put the boy in a stupor. Of course, he knew that honey and sugar were expensive products, but to charge such a sum for 1 cookie, it was a little awkward. Smiling awkwardly, Al said that he had only 1 basket left, and received a quick purchase offer and a request for a short wait for counting. In order not to bother the merchant with calculations, the boy quickly announced the final price. However, he has already calculated his profit so many times that it would be strange if he did not know how much he would receive. Lebrant's strange smile looked too obvious for the young merchant not to have questions about it. Handing the boy a weighty bag of gold, the man decided not to beat around the bush and directly asked if he wanted to work for him when he grew up. Surprised by such a proposal, the boy gave out that he could not even dream of such a thing, because he was just a poor farmer. A beautiful and concise refusal. The man in the hat carefully watched the village moving away from him and thought that no matter how hard he tried, but a poor farmer does not earn 230 gold for one transaction. In addition, the man was sure that this child would face many difficulties in the future. One day, a small accident happened. Mireille fell ill and for some time continued to lie in bed with a fever, and All was sitting on a chair next to her. The girl was clearly very feverish, but she was still apologizing for her friend having to sit with him. It wasn't difficult for the boy. After all, his girlfriend's parents had gone into the field, and it was clearly impossible to leave her alone in such a state. Looking with compassion at his once joyful and overly anemone girlfriend, All advised her to rest more and drink more water, and she only quietly agreed in response. Time slowly passed, and the sun continued its path across the sky. Mireille was too weak because of the fever and therefore fell asleep, and the village itself was just waiting for this. Getting up from the chair, looking around and realizing that there was no one nearby, the boy brought his hand to his friend's face and activated the healing magic. A gentle stream of light slightly enveloped the girl's body. Breathing returned to normal, and sleep itself became calmer. After healing, her fever will subside by morning and Mireille will turn back into the smiling girl he knows. Covering his friend with a blanket, he wished her well. Now children are getting sick all over the village. They all have the same symptoms: fever and weakness. Most likely it's about hygiene. After all, adults, having at least some reserve of magical powers, can use purification on themselves. To solve this problem and not resort to using magic, you need soap. In this world it is, but expensive and also completely ineffective and smelly because it is made of fat. Therefore, after waiting for the next day, the village set before itself a grandiose plan for the day, namely to make soap. Now, by the way, Quinn always followed him wherever he went. Thinking about how to make soap more pleasant to use, the boy thought that he could add flowers. But what flowers are there in this world? I wish there was someone who knew about this. At that moment, his gaze collided with Quinn's. Found. He really has someone who can tell him about the flowers. The one who understands them better than any human is a queen. With the help of his familiar, All found a beautiful tree with snow-white flowers. Admiring their beauty, he immediately recognized them as camellia flowers. Deciding not to delay, the boy began to collect the seeds that had already fallen to the ground. A couple of camellia trees can be planted at home. Bees will obviously like it, and a landscape at home will clearly come to life. Having collected a whole bag of semen, Al wiped the sweat drops protruding from his forehead and smiled happily at the results of his fruitful work. It will take about 2 to 3 kilograms of seeds to make 1 liter of camellia oil. If he wants to grow camellia trees, then he needs to stock up on seeds properly. So, the recipe for making camellia oil is simple. It is necessary to spread all the seeds in the sun so that they dry. So let's leave them for the whole day. We steam the seeds for 15 minutes. This will help remove moisture and simplify further work. After that, we peel the seeds from the husk with the help of magic. A press is needed to extract the oil. When you hit the wedge with a hammer, pressure is applied to the mortar, at which oil is released from the seeds. It is better to filter the resulting oil to get rid of the seeds. Thus, the pure, almost transparent oil will be ready. In addition to the pleasant texture, camellia oil has a simply delicious smell. Then potassium hydroxide should be added to the oil, which can be extracted by mixing calcium hydroxide and potassium carbonate. First, you need to collect weeds from the garden and burn them. Mix the resulting ashes with water. There will be sediment on the bottom and non-sedimentary surpluses that will float to the surface. Potassium carbonate is a sediment formed at the bottom. Calcium hydroxide can be extracted by adding quicklime to the water. The village bought it from Lebrant. By mixing everything we get, we have potassium hydroxide. Add camellia oil and eventually get a soap base. Even in the form of a soap base, the smell coming from the future soap was amazing. All that remains is to pour it into a mold that can be cut out of wood. having made several versions of soap of different shapes. All first decided to test it on himself in his bathtub. The smell in the room was simply delicious. The soap foamed quite well. At this rate, he will be able to sell it too. Emeria, who joined the bathing with her son, became interested in soap, which they did not buy. The boy, without getting out of the warm water, said that he made it himself, adding a little oil, and that they could try to use it. So the whole family was able to test a new soap created with the addition of camellia oil. The next day, the result of the soap made itself felt, and Emeria's face shone with admiration. The amazing smell and effect on the skin clearly gave an advantage. It seems that such a morning has become familiar to the family of the village. Happy as if rejuvenated, Emeria. Tired lark and owl who does not understand anything. Or not at all understanding anymore. It's finally time to meet Mireille. Since the girl was ill recently, the first question at the meeting was the question of her well-being. Or, smiling and greeting her friend, the long-haired girl said that she was already much better and obviously could not do without the help of the village. More precisely, without his caring about her. Delighted that his girlfriend was much better, the boy said that he had brought something for her. It was a small treat made of wood deer meat and a basket of cookies. Thanks were also given. The gifts intended for Mireille did not end there. The boy handed the soap in the shape of a flower and handed it to his girlfriend. The girl admired the beauty and smell of soap, and her friend advised them to wash their hands every day. The words that he made this soap especially for her clearly touched the little girl, and the words that he did not want her to be sick only added an effect to the blush on the children's cheeks. In gratitude for taking care and worrying about herself, Mireille gave her childhood friend a light kiss on the cheek. She's not the only one blushing now. And so the peaceful days of a simple farmer went on. The seasons slowly changed each other, and winter came back to the street. Throwing a couple more logs into the fireplace, all complained about the cold, but there was nothing he could do about it. Still, winter really crept up on them unnoticed. Even with the onset of winter, the period when traders arrive was one of the noisiest in the village. Now all went to the square alone and could calmly greet Lebrant himself. The merchant wished her supplier a good morning, and after that a conversation about work matters began. Apologizing for the request to manufacture only these goods, the man said that the nobility from the capital was addicted to them. Lebrant also decided to warn his friend that many people were interested in where he gets the goods from, and so far he is able to hide the supplier. But if the ruling family comes to him, he will not be able to promise the same, apologizing once again for the fact that his warnings are all he can do in this situation. The man smiled awkwardly and received the same smile in return. All had always believed that merchants only cared about themselves, but now Lebrand, handing him a bag of money, looked very tired. It seems that the situation is much more difficult than he described to him. Deciding not to annoy the merchant anymore by creating problems, all said that he would no longer bring him goods, and in winter there will be nothing unusual to sell, and he will return with something better in the spring. Saying that he was doing this so that his friend would have at least a little rest. Lebrant just laughed and noted that he still could not believe that he was doing business with such a youngster. With that, the two said goodbye. With the arrival of evening, life in the house of the village did not slow down a bit. There were a lot of ideas in the boy's young head that he would like to implement before spring. But the very first one would be soy sauce and miso paste. Compared to modern standards, the boy will be able to reproduce only 60% of the products, and he has not yet achieved complete mastery in cooking. But everything is solved by trial and error. If the village was going to cook all this, then the main dish should definitely be chicken in teriyaki sauce and miso soup. But for this you need a bird. Therefore, dressed in warm clothes, the village went hunting for a snowbird. Snowbird. These monsters reach up to 50 centimeters in length, and their wings in the expanded video reach up to 1 meter. As the name suggests, their feathers are as white as pure snow. Nevertheless, the village was very fond of meat. Just the thought that even in winter, when most animals go into hibernation, he would be able to eat delicious meat and share it with Mireille made him smile on his face. The snow continued to fall in large flakes to the ground, and the boy was lost in thoughts that he had not met a single monster all along the way. Is it because it's winter? At least it's very beautiful because of her. Suddenly, a signal came from the activated detection spell that someone was nearby. Hiding behind the nearby tree, All peeked out from behind it to look around. What appeared in front of his eyes made him involuntarily admire. A snow-white bird with delicate and graceful contours. After looking at it, the boy completely forgot about his goal. Was there the same snowbird in front of him? Because the one that continued to look in his direction was clearly bigger than he had been told. Suddenly, words rang out in the boy's head that his presence was already known and there was no point in hiding any further. Was it his imagination, or was the bird really talking to him now? Who is she, anyway? All this combination of circumstances reminded me of something, but the village did not attach any importance to it. The village stood next to a large bird. Owl looked at the bird and greeted it with a smile on his face, and then gave his name. The village was warmly dressed, as it was winter outside and snowballs were falling from the sky. The bird looked at the village and began to smile. Then she began to convey to him the information that the village is very interesting and polite. Boy, she meets such a person for the first time. All thought that there really are intelligent beings. The birds began to spread their wings and flap their heads. They had a tuft on their head. A powerful aura appeared around the bird. At this time, All thought that he felt how much stronger this bird was than him. All began to frown and nervously think that if he did something wrong, this bird could deal with him in a moment. The bird began to smile and say that she felt the village's anxiety, but he had nothing to worry about. All and a bird were standing in the snow between the lush trees. The village said that the bird is probably called Snowy. The bird looked at the village and replied that he was wrong. She was a representative of the Loof. The village began to reflect on the origin of the bird. The village's face turned a little red. He began to smile nervously and say that the bird was probably a legend, like a mythical creature. The bird looked at the village and replied to the village and replied that the village was right. She was one of them. Sweat was running down All's face. He was smiling nervously and thought that he thought so. He was lucky that he did not attack the bird. Then the All replied to the bird that he had guessed it right away. Al raised his hand, then he went to the side and said with a smile on his face that it was time for him to go. He did not intend to bother the bird anymore. The bird closed its eyes. Al started to leave. Then he stopped abruptly and began to get nervous, as the bird turned to him and asked him to stop. Snow continued to fall on the ground and on the branches of the trees. Sweat was running down the All's face. He nervously turned to the bird and said that he could be useful to the bird. The bird looked at the village and said that she felt a power in the village that was disproportionate to his age, and he also needed to learn more about himself. The bird began to open its wings again. Then the bird said that it was interested in the village, and from that moment on it would closely monitor it. All stood to the side, his face reddened, and his mouth opened in surprise. A mouth appeared on the village's face. He began to nervously shout that the bird should explain what its words meant. The bird looked suspiciously at the village and replied that maybe he had some objections. The village began to sweat even more. All lowered his head and said that the bird could do whatever he wanted, but there was nothing special about him. The bird began to lift its head and reply that it would decide for itself. The snow did not stop falling on the ground and on the branches of the trees. The bird began to open its wings and say that it needs to get smaller so as not to attract people's attention, and the village should also come up with a cute name for it. All began to smile and thought that the bird was very excited. All began to smile nervously and say that he could offer the bird the name Haku. The bird looked thoughtfully at the village. They were silent for a while. Then the bird began to lift up its head with laughter and said that the village had come up with a good name. The bird shrank several times and ended up on the shoulder of the village. The bird looked at the village and said that he should, from now on, call him Haku. All looked at the bird in embarrassment. Then the village offered to go home. The bird began to smile and replied that she couldn't wait to see what human children were doing. Al held the bird on his shoulder and they went. Al looked at the bird and said that maybe he was having fun, but Haku should not talk in front of others. Haku replied that he understood everything and would behave like an ordinary bird in front of other people. Alu and Haku were at home. The village warned the household that he was back. A large bee suspiciously approached the hack and began to stare at him menacingly. Haku stared at the bee in fright, sweat dripping down his head. The bee flew up to the village and began to say that he should explain who came with him. All began to wave his hands nervously and reply that the bee had misunderstood everything. After a while, Haku approached the bee and they started looking at each other. The bee glared at Haku. When all noticed what was happening, he was surprised. The bee hovered in the air in front of Haku and they stared at each other in silence for a while. All stood between them and nervously thought that maybe the guys were communicating in this way. After a while, the bee flew in the other direction from Haku, and Haku himself closed his eyes and began to shake his tuft in different directions. All's face was red. He was watching what was happening carefully. Then Haku looked at the bee and started telling All that he had talked and explained everything to the bee. Soon they might even become friends. The village began to rejoice at the good outcome of events. Meanwhile, a fire was burning in the fireplace. Haku looked at the village and said that the bee was just crazy about the village. Al looked at Haku in surprise. Then a bee flew up to him, and he said that he was surprised, and the bee was very cute. Haku was standing not far from the guys with his eyes closed. It continued to snow outside. Meanwhile, the village began to imagine everything to Haku. After a while, a sunny day came. Snow was placed on the trees. On the street, not far from the plowed field, there were shopping carts. Merchants offered various items of clothing to local residents, and they looked at the offered items with interest for purchase. All and Myriel walked side by side. They stopped in front of Lebrant and wished him a good day with smiles on their faces. Lebrant began to smile back and say that they really hadn't seen each other for a long time. The guys had grown up significantly over the winter. Lebrant and the guys started discussing that there aren't many people in the market in winter, but things are getting better in spring. Myriel raised her hands up and presented different dishes. Then she said that the village cooked different delicious dishes. All was embarrassed. Owl said that he didn't bring food today. Suddenly, a glass bottle with a beautiful lid appears. There was some liquid in it. An unusual magical light emanated from the bottle. Lebrant and Myriel enthusiastically began to examine the bottle of liquid. Myriel was wondering what kind of beautiful bottle it was. Lebrant began to say that it was really glass. You rarely find an elegant thing anywhere. Maybe Lial could tell you about the contents. All opened the bottle and poured several drops of the contents of the bottle onto his hand. Lebrant and Myriel watched the actions of the village in surprise. All started saying that he wanted to create a healing potion. He got this liquid randomly. All turned to Myriel and said she had to be patient for a while. Then All put his palms with the liquid from the bottle against Myriel's face. Myriel was a little surprised by the actions of the village. The liquid began to soak into the skin of Myriel's face. She stared in front of her in surprise. After a while, Myriel's face began to shine. All said it was a skincare lotion. It helps to moisturize the skin and make it smoother and more radiant. Lebrant took the bottle of liquid in his hands and said that the village had created something incredible. Any lady would be delighted with such a product. All began to smile nervously. Then he said that he could, whether Lebrant could guess the cost of this lotion. Lebrant rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The guys began to discuss that the village was ready to sell 100 vials and stopped there. Lebrant spread his arms and replied with a smile that the village already understands what can happen due to demand, so Lebrant agrees to the village's offer. Owl began to smile back at Lebrant. There was a plowed field behind Lebrant. The guys were standing on the road, next to the shops. They started waving goodbye to Lebrant. All presented a bag of coins and thought that he had earned 10 gold coins for a bottle he could continue to earn from their sales. The guys found themselves in the forest. Myriel raised her hand to the top and said that the further they would study. Owl smiled and replied that they could go to the forest and start picking potatoes. Myriel agreed to Owl's proposal. The guys found themselves in a potato field which was surrounded by a forest. Myriel took the sticks and started waving them. Owl was picking vegetables and thought that he had nothing to worry about. He had decided everything for himself. 2 months had passed. The village has become too noisy. Residents gathered on the street and began to discuss why the aristocrats had come to them and in such large numbers. All stood in the crowd and stared nervously in front of him. Lebrant stood in front of the village, sweat dripping down his face. Lebrant raised his hand and began to smile nervously. The aristocrats were standing at the gate. Carriages were visible behind them. And then there was only the forest and the mountains. Sweat was running down All's face. He frowned and began to think that Lebrant could not withstand the onslaught of the nobles and brought them here. Apparently they liked the lotion and other items made by All. He wants to leave here as soon as possible so as not to attract suspicion. Librant spread his arms to the sides and with a smile on his face began to say that he was sorry for being late to visit, but he had prepared a lot of goods for sale for the residents. The residents listened attentively to Librant's story. Then the residents began to whisper that Librant really wanted to ignore everything that was happening. What should they do next? Sweat was running down Librant's face. He looked nervously at the village and continued to say that it was the gentleman who wanted to see the man who sold him new goods. But Librant warned them that this was a mysterious person. They would not find this person. Owl thought that Librant was trying to shield him. He should behave like a child and not attract attention. Owl raised his hand and said with a smile that his mother had asked him to buy soybeans as soon as Librant arrived. Librant looked nervously at the village and said with a smile that they really hadn't seen each other for a long time. Librant was grateful to the village for buying goods from him. All smiled nervously back at Librant. As soon as everyone fell silent, a girl began to get out of the carriage. She abruptly began to call Librant. Librant and all began to get even more nervous. The girl got out of the carriage and said that she could tell him about this child. Librant nervously replied that all was just a village boy. All looked at the girl enthusiastically and thought that it was really Mrs. Moore. All imagined a beautiful castle with high towers. And then he thought that Mrs. Moore is married to the count who owns these territories. She is also very smart and is a strong magician. The lady really corresponds to her status. All presented different bottles and thought that the lady was following all the fashion trends. She was also obsessed with her appearance. Probably the lotion brought her here. The lady leaned over to the village and began to ask him about soybeans. All picked up the bag and replied with a smile on his face that his mother would make a seasoning from soybeans. There was a forest and plowed fields behind the village. Then drops of sweat appeared on All's face, and he realized what he had said without even thinking about the answer. Librant was standing next to the lady. Beads of sweat appeared on his face, and with a nervous smile, he said that actually pasta was made from these beans. Mrs. Moore's face became gloomy. She turned an evil look at Librant and said that he should not interfere with her talking to this child. Librant approached the village. Sweat dripped down his face, and he nervously replied that he was sorry for the misunderstanding. All was standing next to him. He shrank all over and thought that he was somehow scared. Owl held a bag of beans in his hands and said that Mr. Librant was not lying. Many people in their village use these beans for pasta. Moore looked at Awa suspiciously. Then she put her hand to her chin and realized that the village was not lying to her. She could see it. All began to think that he had not imagined that Mrs. Moore was using magic to find out if he was lying. Moore closed her eyes and said that she hadn't known before that soybeans were used like this. But it's a pretty curious way. Miss Moore leaned over to the village and said with a smile on her face that she was grateful for his time. All looked at Mrs. Moore's face in surprise. An unusual atmosphere arose around them. Then the girl abruptly turned around and began to walk away to the side where the carriages and other people were standing. Those who came with her also followed the wagons. Librant leaned his hand against his chest. Sweat dripped down his face. He looked into the distance and calmly exhaled. All stood nearby and watched the gentleman go. Mrs. Moore looked askance at the guys and thought about it. Librant held his hand on his chest and nervously, with relief, began to smile. All looked at him, also with a smile. The girl looked at the smiling and red face of the village and thought that he definitely did not look like an ordinary child. All noticed Mrs. Moore's gaze and looked at her in confusion. The girl looked down and thought that there was an abnormal amount of magic in the village's body, but he was hiding it. It was the village that Librant was trying to hide from everyone. The girl imagined the village and continued to think that the village would not be able to hide forever. It has a huge amount of magic and is an ordinary farmer's child. It looks suspicious. The village's face was red. He began to laugh and think that this time he was lucky. Starting tomorrow, he could continue to enjoy his carefree life as a farmer. The next day came. All was walking through the forest. He stopped and looked away. He felt that someone was watching him from behind the bushes. The village could not make out the face of the man who was watching him. All was working in the garden and reflected that the person who was watching him must have been sent by Mrs. Moore. She is serious and does not intend to give up. This is a fact. All remembered the pretty faces of his bee and Haku, who were hiding in the bushes. All thought that he could not use magic, and he also asked Bee and Haku to hide for a while. Al took water and began to carry it with a smile on his face. Then he thought that he needed to live the life of an ordinary farmer. Lately, he has really resorted to magic a lot. Giving it up will help him enjoy everyday life. 2 more weeks have passed. The village was not far from his house. Owl is chopping firewood with a large axe, and from fatigue he began to wipe his sweaty face. Owl narrowed his eye and thought that he had not felt followed for several days. But it was worth making sure of it. Owl finds himself in a forest thicket. He puts his hands to the side and begins to conjure detection magic. Flickering lines appeared around the village. He closed his eyes and began to think that it did not seem to him. 2 weeks was quite a short time, but apparently Mrs. Moore did not have enough patience for a long time. Haku and a bee abruptly appear behind the village. They abruptly began shouting his name. From fright, Owl blushed and screamed. Owl put his hands in front of him and started shouting that he had asked Haku and bee not to come out until he told them, as they might be watching him. Haku replied that this was not what was important now. They had come because the situation was out of control. Owl looked at Haku in surprise. Haku turned his back on the Owl and said that he should use spatial vision to mount Azara and do it as soon as possible. Owl looked at the mountain, then he spread his arms to the sides and began to conjure. At that time, the village thought that these mountains were located on the outskirts of the village of Onin. Monsters from A to D rank live at the foot of the mountain, so even dragons live at the foot of the mountain, so even dragons live. Owl was scared. Haku looked at him and said that at last the village understood everything. A radar with a lot of dots appeared. Owl thought he saw a horde of monsters. There were more than 100 of them. The village presented various monsters that were enraged and armed. These monsters were everywhere on the ground and in the air. Owl thought that all these monsters were heading straight for the village. The village's face was full of horror. He looked at Haku and said that this was a very bad situation. Haku introduced the village and said that the village was right. But not only the villages were under threat. The bee was flying in the air. Haku looked at the village and said that he and the bee would go to protect the inhabitants of Ancient, and the task of the village was to protect their home. Sweat was running down Owl's face. He nervously listened to Haku's suggestion. Owl didn't know how to deal with the horde of monsters. Haku imagined the impending darkness on the village, and said that the village would definitely cope with it. In the worst case, the village would be wiped off the face of the earth. Owl frowned and thought about it. Owl clenched his hands into a fist and stopped panicking. Haku looked at the boy and said that the village had become more determined. He could see that. They had little time left. They were going to the village, and the village should do everything in its power. Owl ran out of the forest, and finally he said that he would do his best. Haku and the bee flew in the opposite direction. Haku replied to Owl that in that case they would not say goodbye. Owl found himself at his house. While Owl was running, he thought that Haku and bee would be able to save other villages, but he needed to do something else. With all his might, Owl opens the door with his hand. When Owl ran into the house, he started shouting loudly and calling for his parents. The parents were standing in front of the village. They were slightly scared by the sudden appearance of their son. The village began to shout that a horde of monsters was coming from the sacred mountain. If they did not stop the monsters, then the village would come to an end. Sweat began to run down the faces of the parents. They looked at their son in fright and began to say that the village was definitely not joking. The village continued to shout that this was not a joke. The villagers needed to be evacuated urgently. The father looked at the village in fright. The father of the village frowned and began to say that the situation was really urgent. Owl interrupted his father and shouted that he would go to the village, and Mom and Dad should leave this place. Owl walked away from his parents. Then he apologized to them and abruptly began to run away from home. The parents of the village looked at him in fright when he took off. They began to call his name loudly. Owl ran away from home. He squeezed his eyes shut and began to think that his parents should forgive him. They would probably be very angry with him, but he could not do otherwise. After a while, the village turned out to be on a hill. He looked at the village with a serious expression. Then he imagined the fire and thought that while the parents were evacuating the residents, he had to do something. Owl raised his hands up and began to conjure. Owl held his hands above him. After a while, a huge explosion occurred in the sky. Magic continued to emanate from the hands of the village. Owl stopped conjuring. He abruptly turned around and thought that he was sure that Mrs. Moore's subordinate was still in the village, and he would definitely pay attention to this distracting explosion. Owl turned his gaze towards the mountains. A horde of monsters was rushing from there. Dust began to rise from under their feet and paws, from the ground into the air. Owl looked closer and saw that many different monsters were rushing at him. They were opening their mouths, and some of them were armed. Owl looked at the furious faces of the monsters and thought that he knew that there would be a lot of monsters. They all looked the same crazy. Monsters are running down the mountain as if in fear of something. Owl remembered the monsters he had seen earlier and wondered if those monsters could have come down the mountain for the same reason as these. Then Owl spread his arms out to the sides and started shouting that he had no choice. He would have to use magic to save the village. Owl was standing on the ground. He raised his hand up and began to conjure. A tornado began to rise from his hand into the air. Christmas trees grew around the village. The village raised both hands and began to conjure a cutting tornado. Gusts of wind began to pierce into the bodies of monsters that were approaching the village. All continued to conjure, and gusts of wind attacked the monsters. Parts of the monsters and their armor began to fall to the ground. Sweat was running down All's face. He was trying to catch his breath. In front of the village lay the trusted monsters. Some of them had their limbs snatched away. Sweat was running down All's face. He was breathing heavily and looking at the monsters. Then All closed one eye and said that he had managed to cope with the first squad. The village stood on the ground, with the bodies of the affected monsters lying next to it. All took up a fighting pose. He looked in front of him, at the hill from which another horde of monsters was approaching. Dust rose into the air from the oncoming monsters. Owl's face was covered in sweat, and he had bruises under his eyes from fatigue. Owl looked ahead and thought that there were too many monsters. If the attack of the monsters continued, then he would not be able to defeat them. The All tensed, then he raised his hand up and began to conjure. The magic in the All's hand began to glow. All started shouting that it was not the time for him to complain. Now he was using his strongest spell. All continued to hold his hand above him. He performed a spell called Thunderclap. A lot of lightning struck the monsters and the ground. The monsters began to be electrocuted by lightning. As soon as the spell ended, there were many charred monsters lying on the ground. The monsters that remained alive looked at their trusted relatives in fright. The village stood on a small piece of land that was not filled with the bodies of trusted monsters. At this time, another horde of monsters was moving towards the village. The village's face was covered in sweat, and it began to make another magical thunderclap attack. In the next instant, the crowd of monsters that was advancing on the village was struck by a lot of lightning. In front of the village, there was a view of a field that was littered with the bodies of charred monsters. Creepy monsters continued to approach the village from afar. Some of them were armed. Sweat was running down All's face, and his hair was disheveled. All looked at the bodies of the monsters and said that he really did a good job. Armed monsters began to appear in the field. The village collapsed to the ground, and a large stone lay next to it. All leaned his hands on the ground. He lowered his head and said that things were bad. He had almost no strength left. In the next moment, horror appeared on the face of the village. He was greatly frightened by the loud roar of some creature. All continued to lie on the ground. He raised his head and saw that a huge dinosaur was standing in front of him. The monster growled loudly and surveyed the surrounding areas. Behind him, as well as at the dinosaur's feet, were other creepy monsters. Owl was horrified. He looked at the monster and thought that it was really an imperial dinosaur. They had died out long ago. He had a rank. This monster could destroy an entire village. The monster opened its toothy mouth and began to growl loudly. In the next instant, the monster directed its prey towards where the village was standing. All opened his eyes and mouth wide in surprise. All activated the barrier in an instant, but the monster easily broke through it and All bounced aside from the blow. The hat on the head of the village, from the blow, flew off him. The monster was waving its tail while All was flying in the air. Blood sprayed from his mouth. All collapsed to the ground and screamed in pain. There were clouds of dust around the village. He began to rise from the ground and moan in pain. Raising his head, Owl began to wipe the blood from his face. All looked at a huge monster in front of him. Then he thought that his business was bad. The All's strength was almost running out. It was not a fact that his magic would work on a dinosaur. All magical energy was spent on thunderclaps. He could not live without magic. The next moment, a dinosaur's clawed paw was rushing towards the village. He decided to attack the village again. All looked at the dinosaur's paw in fright. The dinosaur's attack was instantaneous. Owl looked at the dinosaur's clawed paw and thought that the attack was too fast. he would not be able to dodge. All fell to the ground. He remained unharmed, as Haku appeared in front of him and the dinosaur in time and repelled the monster's attack. Monster and all were surprised by the sudden appearance of Haku. Then a bee appeared in front of the royal dinosaur's muzzle. It began to attack it with flashes of light, and the owl looked up in surprise. Haku's muzzle and the bees were alert and serious. They hovered in the air and looked into them. Owl started shouting the names of Haku and Bee. Owl looked at Haku and with a smile on his face said that the guys came on time. Haku replied that he apologized to the village for being late. Haku and the bee flew in the air and told All that they would help deal with the monsters, and All would have to deal with the dinosaur. The next moment, Haku and Bee rushed towards the monsters and began attacking them from all sides. The monsters were trying to fight them off. Owl, with a smile on his face, began to say that, as expected from the legendary Loof Bird and the Bee Queen, they would definitely cope with the monsters. Owl looked at the dinosaur and started shouting that he would be the opponent of the dinosaur. The monster could immediately attack him. The monster began to look at the village angrily and show its teeth. Without thinking for a long time, the monster began to run towards where the village stood and growl loudly. Rocks appeared from under the dinosaur's paws. All got into a fighting position. He was ready for the monster's attack. All thought that the monster had managed to catch him in the passport once. The monster approached the village, but he managed to dodge and jump aside. At the same time, All thought that if he focused on the monster, he would notice that the monster was not moving so fast. All closed his eyes and concentrated on magic. His hair began to develop, and bubbles began to appear around the All itself. Then All put his hands in front of him and attacked the monster with a water machine gun. Drops of water began to break on the monster's body. The monster was all in the water. He turned to the village and began to growl loudly. The monster struck with its tail, but All dodged. All thought that the monster's scales were very dense. The attack did not work. The All hovered in the air. The dinosaur continued to strike, and the All dodged them and made water attacks. All thought that salt attacks were not so useless. The monster stood with its back to the village. It continuously waved its tail. The village itself hovered in the air, dodging the monster's attacks. The village hovered in the air. In front of it was the tail of a dinosaur. All closed his eyes and put his hands in front of him. Then he started making water attacks over and over again. Then the village flew over the huge dinosaur head. The village continued to appear around the dinosaur and attack it with a water machine gun. The dinosaur waved its tail to attack the village, but it couldn't do anything. Al thought it was obvious that he was no match for the dinosaur. All began to smile and think that he was having a lot of fun. He never would have thought that fighting such a strong opponent would be so much fun. The water was flowing down the monster's body. He looked in front of him and growled loudly. The monster glared at All, who was standing on the ground and teasing the monster. All began to grin and think that he was using water attacks against a rank monster. All hovered in the air. He put his hands in front of him and began conjuring ice bullets. Ice crystals began to fly towards where the dinosaur was standing. The dinosaur raised its muzzle up. It began to growl loudly as the monster began to gradually become covered with ice. The water that was on the monster began to freeze. After a while, the monster collapsed to the ground. Clouds of dust rose into the air. All imagined the silhouettes of dinosaurs and thought with a smile on his face that as soon as the cold weather sets in, reptiles can't even move. And dinosaurs, this is a kind of reptile. The monster was clearly not ready for such an outcome of events. All closed his eyes. Then he put his hands in front of him and began to conjure. A flickering circle began to appear between the hands of the village. Then Pool imagined Vector and thought that he was using lightning magic and an iron coin as a guide. The village's face has changed. It has become formidable and resolute. Owl held his hands in front of him. Magic accumulated in front of them. Owl said that now the monster will come to an end. Owl put his hands in front of him and launched an attack of an ultra-electromagnetic charge. The jet of energy went straight into the dinosaur. Lightning enveloped the monster's body. The monster opened its toothy mouth, from which the tongue began to stick out. All held his hands in front of him. The bright flash from his magic gradually began to fade. In the city of the monster, a through-hole was formed from the attack of the village. Remnants of electricity passed through the monster's body, and a dusty clot formed around it. The monster raised its head up. It opened its mouth and began to make terrible sounds. Blood and smoke began to ooze from the wound in the monster's head. After a while, the monster began to stagger and eventually collapsed to the ground. From hitting the ground, a column of dust rose into the air. All approached the monster's head. Sweat was running down All's face and he was wiping it with his hand. All stared in surprise at the hole in the monster's head. Then All fell to the ground. He spread his arms and legs in different directions. All was lying on the ground and trying to catch his breath. Then he closed his eyes and said that he had difficulty defeating the monster, as his strength was almost running out. Haku and a bee appeared in front of the village. The guys started telling All that he did a good job in the fight. They didn't expect anything less from Haku. All blushed with embarrassment, then he said that he was grateful to the guys for the praise and how they coped with other monsters. Haku replied with a smile on his face that the village had nothing to worry about. He and the bee had coped with everything. All got up from the ground and shouted that he was declaring the battle over. Haku and the bee flew into the air and began to fly away. Behind Haku, a view of the spruce forest and mountains opened up. The parents of the village were standing on a small road that led to the house. There were front gardens on both sides of the road. There were plowed fields behind the house. The village turned out to be on the other side of the road where the parents were standing. All began to cheerfully wave his hands and greet his parents. The parents were very happy about the return of the village. Owl ran up to his parents, and they started hugging each other. The parents of the village hugged him and rejoiced. They cheerfully called the village by name. Owl's father was smiling, and tears of joy appeared on his mother's face. All's mom said that she has a lot to say, but first of all, she is very happy to have All back. All lowered his head and began to apologize to his parents. The sky began to darken over the roof of the village family's house. All's father approached him and said that they no longer had to worry about the invasion of monsters. The father introduced the horde of monsters and continued to say that the procession is called the migration of monsters. The villagers took refuge in the headman's house. All replied that there was nothing more to worry about. The father of the village began to smile and then said that he was unaware of his son's strength. All began to smile back at his father. All blushed and began nervously touching his hat. All began to answer his parents that he had a blessing. He also trains a lot. All touched his hat and looked away. The parents of the village looked at him attentively. Then the parents began to laugh loudly and say that they did not know that the village had such a powerful blessing. But he should not be so reckless. All looked at his parents and smiled nervously. The parents continued to say that it was better to keep such power a secret from others so that there would be no unnecessary problems. The father of the village began to smile and say that he would go. He would go to the headman, and the village and mother should wait for him here. All said with a smile on his face that he could go with Dad. The father began to leave and, with a smile on his face, replied that he would cope on his own. The headman could go out, since everything was already over. A few days passed. A knight in armor arrived in the village. He held a paper in front of him and began to read that All and his father should proceed to Margrave Randolph. There were more soldiers with the knight. All of them were in front of the village house. All and his family looked at the soldiers in surprise. All nervously thought that his calm was quickly disturbed. All nervously looked at his father and began to say what exactly his father had told the headman then. The father nervously looked away and was silent. Then drops of sweat flowed down his father's face, and he began to say that at first he just told everyone to hide, because when he and All went into the forest, he saw a horde of approaching monsters. The soldiers walked through a small area where the bodies of monsters lay, and the villagers went with the soldiers. All remembered how he made a distracting explosion, and thought that the explosion had not gone unnoticed by Mrs. Moore. The soldiers began to go to their wagons. All this time, the village thought that, as a result, an even bigger lodge caused a lot of problems. The village had a bad presence. All loaded himself into a cart along with the soldiers and drove to the Duke. After a while, All and his father found themselves at a huge building. It was very beautiful and had many large windows. The father of the village looked at the beautiful building in surprise. Once inside the building, All and his father walked along a large corridor behind the knights. There were a lot of girls standing by the walls who were dressed in maid costumes. Al and his father found themselves in one of the rooms of the building. They sat down on carved chairs, a round table in front of them. Al and his father were very nervous and exhausted from the trip. All frowned and began to think that, as expected from the Margrave, His decoration was much grander than their farm. It was a completely different world. He could only dream of such luxury. Owl closed his eyes, then he looked at his shaking father. He was very nervous and thought that his father looked more tense than him. There was a girl in front of the village. She was holding a tray and putting cups on the table. Owl thought that it could be a maid, but this girl has cat ears. The girl smiled shyly when the village began to thank her. The girl turned around and started to leave. Owl thought that this was the first time he saw a beastman. This girl's ears must be very soft to the touch. Owl's father looked at him and said sheepishly that he thought that this girl had such a soft touch. Owl looked at his father in embarrassment. Then he blinked and thought that his father should be ashamed to say such words out loud. A man in a suit appeared behind the village. He said that it was really the first time the village had seen a beastman. Owl did not expect the sudden appearance of a man and was scared. Owl frowned. He opened his mouth in surprise and began to turn in the direction from which he heard the voice. The man in the suit started laughing. Then he said that why did the village have a strange expression on his face? Did he scare the village? Owl frowned and thought that he needed to be careful. This man had appeared too suddenly. The man bent down and introduced himself. His name was Jamon Laurel. He is the head butler. Owl's father nervously introduced himself in response. Owl cautiously examined the man and thought that in order to achieve such a status, a person must be unusual. Somewhere he had already heard the surname. The man went to the door. He looked at the guys and said that he could escort Owl and his father to the gentleman's office. He also apologizes for the long wait. Owl and his father watched and listened attentively to the man. After a while, the guys found themselves in one of the rooms of a large building. The study had beautiful wooden furniture, as well as a large window. The butler said that the meeting would be held here. He would immediately call the gentleman. A man came into the room. He was blond and bearded. He apologized for being late. Owl and his father were sitting on the sofa. There was a wooden table in front of them, on which there was a tea set. Owl's father looked nervously at the man. The man looked at the guys with a smile on his face. He said that his name was Randolph von Aristel. He was the one to whom the king bestowed the title of Margrave, and the guests must be Poole and his father, Lark. The man sat down opposite the village and his father. The man smiled and said that the guys probably already know his name. He would like to discuss the recent incident with the guys. Drops of sweat were running down the face of Owl's father. He was not smiling early. The village itself sat silently and looked at the man. The Duke said he would like to get right to the point. The man frowned at the guys and continued to say that the guys were the first to see the approaching monsters. Can they tell us about it in more detail? The father of the village was very nervous, and the village itself smiled sweetly at the man. Sweat was running down the face of the village's father. He began to smile nervously and say that as soon as he saw the monsters, the first thing he did was inform the headman about them. The man put his hands on his feet and said that the father of the village was just a farmer, for which he took his child into the forest. Owl's father nervously replied that they had run out of medicines, and Owl helped to collect herbs for them. Sometimes they go hunting in the forest. Owl thought that it was not in vain that he and his father practiced questions and answers while the conversation was going smoothly. The man put his hand to his chin and thought. Then he closed his eyes and began to think further. The father of the village looked at the man and was sweating. The man frowned and thought that there was logic in these words, but perhaps the guys were deliberately hiding some information. The man abruptly began to say that maybe it was because of them that the procession happened. The father of the village and the village itself were very scared. The father of the village put his hands in front of him and nervously replied that the man was wrong. He could swear by anything, but they were not to blame for anything. Owl stared thoughtfully in front of him. There was silence in the office for a while. The man thought that it would not be enough to attract ordinary hillbillies to monsters. It is suspicious that the farmer's son is extremely calm. He is probably hiding something. The man imagined a battlefield with monsters. Then he said that the damage was 0, and the magician who examined this battlefield concluded that lightning magic was used in the battle. The father of the village opened his mouth in surprise. Then he turned his gaze to his son. All sat in silence and listened to the man's story. All looked away. He also closed one eye and thought that he was begging his father not to look at him so obviously. The man frowned and looked at the village. Then he said that a very outstanding magician had fought. The village definitely did not want to tell him anything. All sat in silence. The man thought that Moore had told him about meeting an unusual child. All lowered his head His face turned sharply red, and he said that at that moment he was so scared and remembers little. The man introduced the elder's house and said that it was rather suspicious. That day everyone hid in the elder's house, but no one saw the village itself there. The man looked suspiciously at the village and thought that he had lied about it. The village began to get nervous. It was probably worth putting more pressure on him. All replied that he was really so scared that he hid from everyone. The man put his hands together and said that he was told that the village was in the forest during the monster attack. Drops of sweat trickled down Al's face, and he looked at the man anxiously. Al did not look at the man. The man thought that Al was trying to look away. He was definitely hiding something. Then the man began to look angrily at the village and said that the village was definitely hiding something. The village was very scared. Al began to close his eyes, and gradually it began to darken in them. Al thought that it was easier to fight monsters than to sit in interrogation. He needed to figure out how to get out of it. Al's father was sweating and fainting. Al squeezed his eyes shut. Sweat trickled down his face, and he thought that this was really the end of his quiet life. Suddenly, the door of the room opened and a woman's voice was heard. A girl shouting Randolph's name. It was Mrs. Moore. The girl's hair was loose and she was wearing a beautiful dress. There is an unusual atmosphere around Miss Karina. The mistress said that Randolph should tell her what was going on here. Al looked fearfully in front of him. His mouth and eyes were wide open. He realized that Mrs. Moore had entered the office. The man frowned. He turned his head to the side where Mrs. Moore was standing and called the girl by name. Al sat silently on the couch and looked at the girl. Mrs. Moore glared at the man. The man began to say with a smile on his face that they were just discussing important issues. Moore became completely gloomy. She approached the man and began to say that the man should immediately shut up. The man guiltily lowered his head and said that he would obey Moore. Al, hearing the man's words, opened his mouth in great surprise. Moore started pointing her finger at the man's face and saying that how dare he put pressure on the child. Sweat began to flow down the man's face, and he tried to justify himself. Moore frowned. Her finger was on the man's nose, and she said that she had already told him that he needed to check everything carefully and not trust his intuition. Al folded his arms and nervously watched what was happening. Moore's face became quite gloomy. An evil smile also appeared on it, and she said that the man deserved punishment. So be it. She was ready to step on him. Moore clenched her hands in the fists and began to step on the man, and he began to scream with pleasure. Al and his father watched in fear. Moore turned to Al and with a smile on her face said that she apologized to Al and his father, the Margrave sometimes does, and then thinks. Moore continued to step on the man's face. Moore stood on the Margrave's face and, with a smile on her face, began to say that she proposed to forget about this misunderstanding and go to tea. All looked at the girl in confusion and fear. Tea began to be poured into the mugs. Moore said that after the procession of monsters, they still had a lot of questions. All held his hands in his lap. Then he replied that Moore was right. The father of the village looked stupidly in front of him and smiled. Moore approached the village and said that he could do magic. All closed one eye and replied that he could do a little. The girl put her hand to her chin and thought with a smile on her face. All frowned and became alert. The girl was drinking from a cup. All was holding cookies in his hands and looking at Moore. Then he thought that she knew for sure that he had stopped the monsters. But she did not tell this to Margrave. All did not understand what Moore had in mind. Owl took a bite of the song and was startled when he heard Mrs. Moore that the cookies were really very tasty. Moore looked into the mug she was holding and continued to say that these sweets make a real splash in the capital, but they are hard to find. All listened to Moore in surprise. The girl approached the village and with a smile on her face, she said that it was very difficult for her to get at least a basket of cookies if only someone would cook it. Personally for her family. All looked at the girl in fright. All blushed. He began to look at Moore's smiling face and thought that he understood everything. The lady said in a veiled way that she would close her eyes to his participation in the battle, and All was obliged to cook these cookies for her. All raised his hands to the top and thought that Moore had figured him out. There was no point in hiding anymore. All smiled and closed his eyes. Then he said that Mr. Lebrander also complained that these cookies were not cooked enough with a laugh. Al's face turned red. He smiled and said that he had heard that these cookies were very difficult to cook. Then Al thought that he wouldn't cook that many cookies. Moore smiled and replied that maybe there would still be a merchant who would buy cookies from the cook in bulk. All drooped and began to smile nervously. Moore smiled and said that it was worth asking Mr. Lebrant about that man. All thought he understood everything. All closed his eyes and said that it was better to find out the recipe for this cookie. An evil smile appeared on Moore's face. She approached the village and said that Lebrant did not know about the identity of the baker. How did the village know that a person could give a recipe? Moore said that if All knows about that person, then Lebrant is deliberately hiding his identity. All turned pale, he looked away and began to get even more nervous. All imagined a smiling Moore holding his head in her hands. Then All thought that he was caught. He would have to dance to her tune. Even the Margrave was not as scary as this woman. Moore approached the village's face and with a smile on her face said that from that day on, she wanted to become a friend for the village, because he would not mind. Sweat trickled down the village's face. Then he replied that he would only be for such an offer. Then All introduced a smiling Moore. She continued to hold his head in her hands. Then the girl said that she hoped that their friendship with All would be very long. Owl and his father were sitting on the couch. Moore was sitting opposite them. Owl reflected that he had brought his father to his senses, and they continued the conversation. Owl considered Ms. Moore and thought that they had time to discuss their friendship. If Owl creates something new, then the first thing he sends it to her, their business partnership should not be interrupted. Owl nervously looked at the smiling Mrs. Moore. The conversation came to an end when Moore said that they should definitely remain friends. The carts began to pull away from the beautiful Moore house. Pud reflected that Moore didn't seem like a bad person, even though she was following him and blackmailing him, and Moore also gave a couple of things as a gift. All and his father found themselves at their house. Their mother was waiting for them on the street. She was holding something in her hands. All reflected that the story of the procession ended on this note. This incident brought them more benefit than harm. The father of the village was very scared when he saw his wife. A gloomy atmosphere arose around the village's mother. She glared at her husband. She was mad at him because he was staring at the maid with the cat ears. Several years had passed. It was quiet and peaceful in ancient times. A girl was sitting in the crib. A bib was tied around her neck. Awel started saying that this cutie is Sia. All smiled broadly and began to ask his sister about her well-being. Then the village thought that their family had finally been replenished. Owl stretched out his arms to his sister to take her. My mother was standing next to me. She smiled and began to say that the village was probably crazy about her sister. All replied that Mom was right because Sia was very sweet. All thought about his sister's future. All clenched his hand into a fist and with a smile on his face said that he would do everything possible for her to live a comfortable and carefree life. All thought that he would do this not only for her, but also for his parents and himself. Abby's parents stood in front of the village because thanks to the efforts of the village, they decided on a second child. They now need nothing. Their son is just gold. The village's face turned red. He was surprised by the words of praise from his parents. All blushed even more and began to smile and call his parents. Gradually, it began to get dark over the house of the All family. He thought that for the past few years, he had not been idle. Al presented many different dishes and thought that on top of everything, Mrs. Moore helped him. She got different ingredients. Thanks to her, he created many different and amazing things. The village presented a smoking stove. Previously, this item had not been in this world. This discovery became a hit. All thought that Mrs. Moore really liked the smoked cheese. Al introduced Mrs. Moore. She was covering the fan with her face. Al thought that he was giving Moore goods for a lot of money. He also began to share recipes with her, for which Al received a percentage of sales. The village remembered a busy street in the city where there were shops. All thought that not only everything was fine with him, the brand opened his store in the capital, where he sold exclusive goods that All made. All imagined his house and a small vegetable garden in front of him. Then he thought that thanks to the help of these two, now he cannot be called a poor farmer. All is just enjoying his rural and carefree life. Myrael and Owl met. The girl stood in front of the village with her hand raised. She called his name aloud. Myrael's face was slightly red. Owl also blushed. He smiled broadly, then called Myrael by name. Myrael closed her eyes and smiled broadly. Owl thought that Myrael was getting prettier and more like a young girl every day, and Owl sometimes gets nervous when he starts talking to Myrael. His sister and Myrael were at the edge of the forest. Owl's sister was sitting on the ground and happily waving her arms. Owl put his hands in front of him and conjured. Myrael was in the vicinity. The guys began to discuss the magic tricks that the village owns. Myrelle approached the village and with a smile on her face said that maybe the village would start teaching her something new today. Al closed his eyes and, with a smile on his face, agreed to Myrelle's proposal. An unusual atmosphere began to reign around the guys. Al put his hand in front of him and began to conjure. Myrelle stood next to him and watched what was happening. Al thought that Myrelle had been interested in magic a lot lately, and he would try to teach her that Myrelle has the ability to do water magic. An unusual glow appeared. The guys were at home, they started cooking. All thought that with the help of water magic, Myrelle would be able to protect himself, and also, Myrelle's often helped him with cooking lately. Myrelle's cooking skills have become better. Myrelle held the knife in her hands. Then she closed her eyes and started laughing loudly. All reflected that Myrelle often starts a conversation about getting married with All. These words make All embarrassed, although they are really close. After a while, All, his sister, and Myrelle found themselves in the forest again. All began to conjure a small hurricane, and the girls laughed. All thought that he and Myrelle spent a lot of time together and became closer. It lasted until one moment. The village was quiet. The guys were in the forest and discussed that their training could be over for today. Myrelle thanked the village for its help. Then Myrelle handed the letter to All. From the Margrave's wife, All was surprised by the appearance of the letter. The village took the letter in his hands and began to read it carefully. From that moment began a series of difficult events in the carefree life of the village. Myrelle stood next to him and looked at the letter in surprise. Behind the guys, the tall tops of the Christmas trees could be seen. The events are transferred to the capital of the kingdom of Lyad. On the top of the mountain there was a large castle with high walls. A little below this hill was the city itself. The city was located on all sides of a wide river. The building had a beautiful architecture. There were tiles on the roof. There was a garden with stone figures at the foundation of a large building. In one of the rooms of the building, there was a cup with a drink and a basket of cookies on the table. Someone was very happy with the liver. A girl with lush hair that was pulled back in tails held a cookie in her hands and looked at it. Then the girl said that the liver is popular. At this time, sweetness, it seems to her that this cookie is the most common and does not differ from others. The girl holds a cookie in her hands. Then she brings it to her mouth and takes a bite. After a moment, the girl's eyes open wide in surprise. Then the girl began to eat the whole cookie and say that it is very tasty. Everything in this cookie from taste to size is perfect. It is exactly different from ordinary cookies. The girl's face turned slightly red. She turned to the man who was standing at the door and said that she wanted to meet the one who made these cookies. The man's name was Albus. He leaned his hand against his chest and with a smile on his face said that if the lady wanted it, he would try to find a man in the shortest possible time. The girl was wearing a dress with dark stripes. The girl continued to eat the cookies. Her face was covered in crumbs. Then the girl began to lead a monologue. She was surprised how quickly the cookies ran out. She did not understand why everyone likes it. Events take place in the capital of the Lyad kingdom, namely in the Lebrant trading house. There was a small brick house on the square, in front of which there were shops, and many people were walking around the square itself. Lebrant was sitting at a wooden table with 2 frames and 2 iron cups on it. Lebrant held the letter in his hands and read it carefully. Then Lebrant began to sweat. He began to wipe his face with his hand and think that he had just established a business. When the Dougal family, the highest aristocracy, and even the royal family showed interest in the village, Albus was standing at the counter of the store. He raised his hand and smiled at the seller. Lebrant thought that the other day the head butler of the Adams family, his name was Albus, was trying to find out something from the merchants. There were several other people in the square besides Albus. The horse-drawn carriage was heading towards the mountains. Lebrant thought that he should meet with Mrs. Moore as soon as possible, although it is unlikely that they will be able to hide the village from such serious people. Lebrant found himself in the mansion of Mrs. Moore. Lebrant raised his hand and began to tell that all the noble families of the kingdom began to be interested in the village. Mrs. Moore put her hand to her face. Then she closed her eyes and thought. Lebrant was sitting on the couch. Moore was sitting opposite him. Moore said that the case has taken a serious turn. In order to protect the village, it is necessary to limit communication with him. This is for his own good. Lebrant anxiously asked if there might be another way out. There was a chandelier on the ceiling. Lebrant and Moore continued to discuss that the village should not know about this yet. but nevertheless, Lebrant would write him a letter with explanations. Several weeks have passed, and events are moving to the Lebrant trading house. Albus stood at the stalls and looked at the customers. The merchant handed the child a small package, and in another shop a woman was choosing goods. Albus squinted and thought that there were fewer people compared to the previous week. All the marketable goods of this store had simply disappeared from the counter. There was a dark and mysterious atmosphere around Albus. Albus squinted and thought that the products in demand had disappeared from the shelves too suddenly. Was it really all delivered by one person? He had heard some gossip about bacon, but did not believe them. There were 2 horses at the inn. Albus was sitting at the bar, and there was a man in a suit in front of him. Albus thought that 10 residents of one village could buy bacon cheaper than in the capital. Aldred raised his hand and asked the bartender for a bottle of ale. There were many tables and many visitors in the establishment, and Albus had a mug with a drink in his hands. The bartender said that once they had a guy from that village in their establishment and treated them to bacon, he really tasted good. Albus closed his eyes and with a smile on his face began to say that maybe the bartender remembers the name of the village that the guy came from. The man put his hand to his chin and thought about it. Then he began to say that he would not remember. But this village is very strange. There was a rack behind the man, on the pegs of which stood various kinds of glass bottles with liquids. Albus imagined a horde of different monsters that were armed. The bartender said that there was an invasion in this village, but it was stopped in half a day, although no one was injured in the battle. These people were protected by God himself. Albus narrowed his eyes and replied that he had heard about the incident. In the castle, on a high hill, everything was quiet. Albus found himself in a room with a lot of books. Albus reflected that he considered this story to be a common rumor since everyone was talking about it. Albus was looking at a book with inscriptions and a small map. Albus thought that there were many versions of what was happening, and it seemed strange to him. Albus then said the name of the village of Onin out loud. After a while, Albus found himself in the guild as a merchant. The man behind the counter said it was the first time he had heard of such a village. All the guild merchants from more developed cities. There were bills on the front desk, and behind it were sacks and wooden barrels. Fluffy clouds floated over the building with the coat of arms of Libra. Albus thought that someone was controlling the flow of information. Albus then ended up at the Adventurers Guild, where he was told that they had no right to divulge information about Onin's whereabouts. The man with the scar on his face was holding a mug and smiling. Then the man replied that there are definitely no hunters in the village of Onin. The food there is delicious and cheap. There is also a lot of work. It is really a wonderful region. The festival will begin there soon. Albus was pouring a drink into a mug held by a man with a scar on his face. Albus thought he had finally found a clue. The man with the scar on his face thanked Albus for his generosity. Someone in a hood was looking thoughtfully at the man with the scar. In a large field that was surrounded by a forest, many people were setting up their tents, and there were also carts with various products on the field. All and Myray were standing at a merchant's shop. All said that this year's harvest festival promises to be fun. Myrail replied that all residents of neighboring villages take part in this holiday every year. Myrail began to smile broadly and say that she had been setting up a stall with the village for the 3rd year. All closed his eyes and replied with a smile that he was grateful to Myrail. She always helped him out. They should try hard this year. Several cows were grazing in the field. The village thought that the harvest festival would be celebrated for 2 days. There would also be a competition on the popularity of stalls. 2 cows would be given for winning the event. 1 cow costs 50 gold. The stalls were being built very quickly, and people were busy working. The village reflected that because of the prize, the neighboring villages decided to take part too. This year there are twice as many stalls. Previously the event had not been held on such a scale. A dark-haired man approached the village. He had a lot of wrinkles on his forehead. The man smiled and said that how are things going at the village? All looked at the man with a smile on his face and said that he was glad to welcome the headman and that things were going well for him. The village's face was slightly red. He thoughtfully said that why the headman decided to make such drastic changes in the celebration. The headman closed his eyes and said, through laughter, that it happened thanks to the village. The man framed the image of the old village and the transformed one. Then the man said that the youth tried to leave the village as soon as possible. But because of the actions of the village, the Margrave's family began to allocate benefits for the village, and it was transformed. The man looked at the village and continued to say that as a thank you, he decided to hold this competition. Everyone is sure that the stall of the village will win this year. All thought it wasn't fair. The man began to calm him down. The village was noisy. All reflected that he certainly loves his region, but he did not do all this for the sake of developing the village. Although if the headman and everyone else are happy, you just need to take it for granted. The man with the scar on his face turned out to be next to the headman and the village. The man raised his hand and greeted the residents. The headman turned to the man and said that it was really Mr. Glenn. He had done a great job, as always. There was an animal in the cart. The headman closed his eyes and bent down a little. Then he said that he saw Glenn's escort for the first time in these parts, and he himself is the headman of this village. His name is Maruga. Albus put his hand on his stomach and bowed in response. Then he smiled and said that he was grateful for his hospitality. His name is Albus. He is the butler of the Duchy of Adams. At this time, at the Margrave's estate, Moore viciously shouted that the butler of the ducal family had really arrived in the village of Onen. She could not let the butler pick up the village. Jimon had to prepare a carriage. The man in the suit obeyed Moore. Moore scowled angrily and clenched her teeth. Then she said that this boy belonged to her and she would not let anyone take away his freedom. Moore also clutched a folded fan in her hands. The next morning came. The harvest festival will begin today. Birds flew over the mountains. The carriage was pulling away from the house. It was pulled by 2 horses. There were fields and lush trees next to the houses. A blond man with long hair was sitting in a carriage and began to say that the one who cooked that very sweetness really lives in a dull backwater. The dark-haired man replied that it was definitely true. There could be no mistake. The carriage drove up to a 2-story house. Gal said there was nothing wrong with this revenge. This man would have to bow at his feet for the honor of working for Count Philin's second son. Sarah said he would need to talk to the headman. Sarah's came into the house. He leaned his hand against his chest and began to say that he was sorry for such a sudden visit. He was the butler of Philaine County. His name was Saris. Could the owner of this house give him time? Saris glared at the side where Albus was standing. The man found himself in the corridor, and through his laughter he began to say that he did not expect to meet the butler of the Count's family in a remote village. The floor was lined with wooden planks. Saris looked at Albus and said that he was a servant of the Duchy of Adams. Albus closed his eyes and replied with a smile on his face that his name was Albus. The men started talking about the headman's location and what they had both forgotten here. Saris began to smile maliciously and say that he was only following his master's orders, but he thinks that their goals coincide with Albus. Albus began to smile maliciously and agree with Saris's words. Saris said that he wanted to talk to the headman, but since he was not there, it was time for him to go. A man with a scar on his face came into the house. He said that why the Count's family was in the village. Albus replied that they had probably come to the village for sweets. The men continued to discuss the Count's family. A dark clot formed above the building. Albus closed his eyes and thought that the rumors about the Count's son turned out to be true. The boy was greedy for money and power. Did he really want to be a supplier of sweets? Albus opened his eyes and looked seriously to the side. Then he said that the son of the Count would do everything to climb to the top. What would be his next step? Albus was looking forward to him to find out better. Various people raised their hands and rejoiced that the headman had announced the beginning of the harvest festival in the village of Onen. Flags were placed on the tops of the tents built. The stalls were located close to each other. The sellers offered different goods to the customers. There were wooden barrels next to some of the tents. Many guests walked through the rows and examined the goods. Al and Myrel were standing behind the counter of their tent. There were various items on display. There was a huge queue of people who wanted to buy goods from them at the children's store. Myrel looked at the crowd in surprise, and all began to get nervous. The guys looked at each other and with smiles on their faces began to discuss that this year they really have a lot of customers. We must try and serve everyone. All stood on a trading bench and sold groceries, and Myrel stood in front of people and invited them. After a while it became much quieter and calmer. All's face was red. He was wiping his face with his hand from drops of sweat. Then the village closed its eyes and said that the number of people had decreased in the afternoon. They should also take a break and have lunch. The Count's second son began to make his way through the crowd of people. He pushed people and said with displeasure that the owner of the shop was really creating the cookies. He wanted to get the cookies right now. They should bring him cookies immediately. Myrel and all looked at the man in surprise. Myrel started saying that maybe all knows who this man is. All replied that he was a classic, arrogant, and stupid aristocrat. The Count's second son was shouting, waving his arms, and scaring people. Myrel replied that in this case, the village should not meet this person and she would serve him herself. Myrel came up behind the man. She was holding cookies in her hands and said with a smile that maybe the gentleman wanted to buy cookies. The man was surprised. The man's eyes filled with madness. He began to smile strangely and looked at Myrel. Myrel looked at the man in surprise and was silent. Then the man started shouting that Myrel was very beautiful and should become his wife. Myrel was surprised. The man spread his arms to the sides and, with his eyes closed, began shouting that she would become the wife of the head of the filial county. Then the man started promising different things to Myrel. Myrel smiled and held out her hand in front of her as a refusal. The man began to shout nervously that he wanted to hear the reason for the refusal. Myrel started shoving cookies into the man's mouth and saying that no one would cooperate with someone like him, so the man could finish the cookies and leave. The village stood aside. There were other residents next to it who laughed and watched the process. All smiled nervously and said that Myrel was sharp-tongued. The man blushed all over. He clenched his hand into a fist and shouted that the guys would still remember him. All and Myrel stared in surprise at the retreating man. The guests of the event stood at the stalls and laughed at the blushing man. Myrel opened her mouth in surprise and said that the man had left and hadn't even paid. All said through laughter that it was not worth paying attention to him. The event continued to work. Many people looked at the shops with goods. A cart pulled by 2 horses was leaving the village. 2 men were sitting in the carriage. Saras closed his eyes and said that he could, if the Lord would listen to him. The Earl's son sat frowning and waited for the conversation with Saras to continue. The man remembered the smiling faces of the guys and said that Saras should follow the village and find out about everyone with whom this girl communicates, and find the person she is in love with. Saras was ready to do his master's bidding. The Count's son clenched his hand into a fist. An evil smile appeared on his face, and he said that he would personally deal with Myrel's lover, and she would have nothing left but to fall at his feet. There was a very gloomy atmosphere around the man. A cart pulled by 2 horses stopped at a 2-story house. The Count's son was laughing so loudly that he could be heard all over the street. Someone was standing behind a tree and eavesdropping on the conversation between the Count's son and his servant. Albus turned up at the guy shop. He raised his hand up and said with a smile that maybe it was Myrel making cookies. If not, then maybe he would meet with the cook. Myrel looked at the man in surprise. There was a queue for the shop behind Albus. Myrel's face turned red. She began to say that the village was being asked by an aristocrat again. But this time he was handsome and polite. The man looked like a butler. Al looked at Myrel in embarrassment, wearing a peaked cap on his head. All approached Albus and said that he was sorry for the wait. He was the creator of the cookies. Albus replied that he was sorry for distracting all. His sweets tasted incredibly wonderful. All thanked Albus for the praise. All raised his hands a little and said sheepishly that maybe he could help Albus with something. Albus closed his eyes and with a smile on his face, he said that he just wanted to get to know the one who created such an exquisite product. Al frowned a little and looked at the man. Then he thought that this man instills faith in his words, but eats something mysterious in him. Owl said that was the only reason the man called him. Owl looked at Albus warily for a while. Albus began to smile slyly and got a little closer to Owl's face. An unusually tense atmosphere arose around the guys. Albus began to smile slyly and said that it was rare that such a young boy immediately understood everything. Owl could go with him to the capital. Through a smile, Al began to reply that a young boy like him should not spend time with strangers. Albus leaned his hand against his chest. Then he closed his eyes and said that apparently the village had a hard time. His name is Albus. He is the butler of the ducal Alums family. People surrounded Al and Albus. They slowly selected goods from the shops. All bent down a little and said that the man could call him all, for which he would need to go to the capital with Albus. Albus said that his mistress wished to meet personally with the creator of this popular delicacy. All smiled. He leaned forward a little and replied that he was flattered, of course, but was not sure of the correctness of this action. Albus started saying that this trip would be rewarded. It's worth starting with 10 gold coins. What will the village say? All began to smile nervously and think that 10 gold coins, that's 1,000,000 yen, that's a tempting offer. All replied that it was tempting, but he would think about it. Albus said through laughter that he understood everything. Albus leaned his hand against his chest and turned sideways to the village. Then he said that for some time he would live in the village headman's house. If the village changed its mind, he might find him there. But now it's time for him to leave. All listened attentively to the man. Albus began to move away from the village. Owl looked into the distance and thought that this butler had really come to bring the creator to a meeting with his mistress. It would look very strange. Something was clearly wrong here. Night fell, and a huge moon began to peep out from behind the clouds. People continued to walk around the area and pick out goods. A burning fact was attached to each of the shops, which illuminated the territory of the trading floor. A cart pulled by 2 horses stood far from the trading floor near the elder's house. The Duke's son frowned and started shouting that lease had found out about that guy named All. It was very bright and noisy on the trading floor. Saris closed his eyes and began to say that he had found out everything. Al is the creator of cookies, bacon, soap, pita bread, and not only all the main products from the Lebrun house were created by this boy named Owl. Saris remembered the faces of All and Myrelle, and continued to say that about a young lady named Myrelle. It seems that she has her sympathy for All. The girl knows all the recipes for cooking, so she helps him in production. The son of the Count looked at Saris and began to shout that it was definitely true. Maybe he would just deal with the village and take possession of Myrelle. Saris closed his eyes and lowered his head. Then he said that the gentleman was speaking correctly. The Count's son's face turned angry. He stared at Saris and said that Saris should get rid of this boy today without unnecessary witnesses, and this is an order. Saris looked at his master and was ready to do his bidding. The atmosphere was eerie. A tall man walked next to the cart, which was pulled by 2 horses. He was dressed all in black. The man's face was not visible. He was wearing a headdress and a scarf. The Duke's son began to laugh angrily and shout that he would get rid of the boy. Get the woman of his dreams and knowledge into the bargain. Today, luck was definitely on his side. The Duke's son found himself alone in the carriage, and someone started knocking on the carriage door. A voice outside replied that he wished good evening. He would like to discuss something with the gentleman about the village. The Duke's son decided to go out and chat with a stranger. The Duke's son got out of the carriage. He clenched his hands into fists and began to look around. The man began to nervously say that the stranger should show up and tell him what he needed. The door to the carriage remained open, and it was dark outside. After a while, the atmosphere became even darker. A black silhouette of a stranger appeared behind the Duke's son. The stranger was holding something in his hands and began to swing at the man. The Duke's son stood and frowned at the side. A moment later, there was a loud bang and drops of blood splashed into the air. The carriage was still open, and there was a bright light shining on it. After a while, the village became very quiet. The residents began to disperse and return from their homes. A black silhouette of a stranger stood at one of the houses. There was a plowed vegetable garden next to the house. The main character lies on his side and sleeps so sweetly that saliva begins to flow down his chin. But suddenly, his sleep is disturbed by a suspicious rustle. Upon waking up, the hero begins to convulsively recall that his house is safe, because in order to protect himself from thieves, he imposed detection magic on the house. He feels that there is someone at the wall of the house. Using spatial vision, the young man realizes that the stranger is holding a weapon in his right hand, after which he concludes that this is not an ordinary drunkard, because they usually do not carry anything similar with them. The guy slowly dissolves into space with the help of witchcraft, making himself invisible in order to attack first. He's not going to forgive the one who disturbed his sleep. At this time, the stranger who came to deal with the main character frowns because he cannot detect the latter since he does not see his mana. He is very surprised because just a second ago, the young man was on the spot. Suddenly, the main character appears behind the unknown, which puts the first one into a stupor of surprise. He asks what the man in black had left outside his house at such a late hour. Owl looks indignantly and questioningly at the stranger, who, frightened by his voice, jumps back and, at the same time, he throws his weapon at the young man. The guy deflects the blows of the blades with his strength, then spreads his arms to the sides. Without ceasing to use magic, but only strengthening it, strikes back at the opponent. The young man's strength crashes into the shield, which was quickly exposed by the mercenary, but still the blow weakens the latter's legs. The young man squints and begins to think about the stranger. He thinks that, apparently, he is a magician who dodges very easily and uses a shield. So he wonders how long the magician will last. The main character begins to summon small wind vortices similar to tornadoes, in order to test the strength and endurance of a stranger. Having finished summoning hurricanes to himself, the young man directs them all towards the unknown, at the same time shouting a spell. The earth explodes around the stranger. After the young man struck at his opponent and dust appeared around him, he thinks that he finally hit him. But after the fog clears, he only sees the cloak that the killer was wearing falling to the ground. The guy picks up the raincoat and, with chagrin on his face, carefully examines it for any evidence indicating who the attacker might be. The main character thinks that the stranger still escaped, but still this blow was worth it. He is sure that the man will not die, but he is seriously injured and is unlikely to try to attack again. Al scratches his head, turns around and heads towards the house, thinking that now he can finally go to bed. A quiet morning in a house near the mountains begins with a scream. The guy runs up to the screaming girl and asks her what happened. The girl points to the side and excitedly says that there is a man lying there, and he is covered in blood. Mireille leads a young man to a man who is really injured. The blow landed on his head, which is why he lost consciousness, grimacing from the intense pain. The main character bends over to the man and says that he is an aristocrat who recently flirted with his friend. She replies that she thought he was a drunk. That's why he was sleeping. But then she saw the blood. The crowd that is gathered around the stranger lying on his stomach begins to talk among themselves, which causes a noise. This worries the young man and he asks everyone to remain calm. Suddenly, a girl in a voluptuous dress begins to make her way through the crowd. She claims to be the Count's wife, so she promises everyone that she will deal with this incident. After that, he asks everyone to leave the crime scene. A recently approached lady looks at the butler, who was talking to the main character the day before, and asks him to help with the investigation. Mr. Albus replies that he understands everything, because the Count's son suffered on her land. The white-haired man starts looking around and says that he doesn't see the filial family's butler nearby. His words cause surprise on the young man's face. Al plunges into memories and thinks that the one who attacked him at night may be just the same butler. Suddenly, the guy feels eyes on him. It's McGraw's wife leaning towards him and asking him to come over, which causes a wave of embarrassment and misunderstanding. The girl puts her hands on her hips, bends over the young man and says that he knows something and asks to share his knowledge. The guy, in turn, at first pretends that he does not understand what she is talking about, but then agrees to tell everything. Looking around, the main character tells about the night incident. The Earl's wife asks him for information about whether he was attacked by the filial family's butler at night, after which he says that there were rumors that he used to work as a spy for the crown. The girl leans even closer to the village, which is very embarrassed by this action, and promises that she will not specify how he coped with it, but in return asks him to be smart and help find the culprit of the incident. The guy says that they will make every effort to do this. The butler, still examining the body of the man lying down, says that he does not feel any traces of magic. Therefore, the attacker must have used a blunt object. Although the victim is bleeding, but the injury does not seem serious, so it is worth taking him to the house. A second later, all the characters look at the wound and notice something unusual. The girl in the hat reports that some white dust has remained on the unconscious man's head. The young man asks why such dust is needed. The butler, joining the couple who had been wondering about what they had discovered earlier, informs them that it would be best to interview the residents. He suggests that they may have seen something unusual that day. The heroine agrees and says that they need to walk around the village. 3 people investigating the crime are walking through the streets asking passers-by if they notice anything strange last night. The first man who gets in the way of the heroes says that he took alcohol yesterday, so he does not remember anything. But some of the men turn out to be useful and report a black-haired butler who asked about friends' relationships and went through all the stalls in search of something. The butler helping with the investigation smiles kindly and asks a visitor to the market on the street if they have seen a bloody blunt object. To such a question, one of the women replies that she did not see anything. Then, on the way of the gray-haired man, a dark-haired man meets, who again talks about the figure in black. The butler understands that all the citizens are talking about that servant of the Filial family. At the same time, too many people have seen him. The man finds it very strange. At this time, McGraw's wife is asking all the villagers about how they treated the victims and whether he had any enemies. Too many people have seen him. The man finds it very strange. A blonde girl in a headscarf with a straight face says that the man who was recently found with a broken head behaved like the navel of the earth. No wonder someone tried to kill him. The next passerby, with anger on his face, says that the victim was hated. Everyone had time to complain about his behavior to the headman, although he had been in the village for only one day. The old man, who also got in the way of the girl, called the man who was injured by someone unknown, an uncouth boy with a lot of money instead of brains. He said that he annoyed everyone with his presence. The heroes, summing up, say that they found little information. It is worth talking to the village headman, who listened to all the complaints about the arrogant traveler from the residents. The three of them went to the village headman. The dark-haired man reported that many residents came and complained about the stranger's behavior. He also reports that he was an ordinary nobleman, and therefore he asked the population not to pay attention to him. But there were no particularly indignant ones. The headman says that this is the first time he has held a holiday for 2 whole days, so he wanted to discuss this issue with Mr. Albus. He doesn't want this holiday to leave bad memories behind. The butler and the main character do not respond to this. The girl asks why the man decided to spend this year's holiday for 2 whole days. The dark-haired man says that the lady must be aware of the problem of the village, where young people tend to leave it. But over the past few years, the number of inhabitants has increased. He did not even dare to dream about it. Suddenly, the village headman begins to bow and reports that such an increase in residents in the village appeared thanks to the efforts of the village. This behavior of an adult man drives the young hero into the paint. The guy stutters, spreads his hands, and asks the adult to raise his head, saying that there is nothing to thank him for. The young man blurts out that he loves the village as much as a man with his head down. The girl brings her palm to her face and sadly says that, to sum up, in the end they do not have a suspect who could commit a crime against a high-ranking person. Albus closes his eyes at this, which the blonde young man notices. The man thinks that the village has a different opinion about the words that were uttered before, which surprises the guy. The main character is surprised at how the butler understood everything, and at that moment he just laughs, and then asks the adventurers to search the village for the presence of a crime weapon. The young man confidently walks in the opposite direction from his colleagues and says that he and the butler should meet the man again and talk to him in a serious way. McGraw's wife looks at both men in incomprehension and asks what their actions and words mean, whether they want to say that they know who the perpetrator is. An expression of skepticism appears on the girl's face again. She reports that Miss Muley's place is in a rather inconspicuous corner. No one saw any suspicious individuals. How did they understand everything? The guy says that he doesn't like to admit it, of course, but he will try to explain everything to his companion. He claims that initially there were several witnesses who deliberately lied to them. The young man recalls the 3 men whom the group of investigators interviewed the very first, those who claimed that they were drunk all night, and then claims that they were the ones who deceived them. Al continues his explanations and wonders how people know that Gals was just lying bloody near his house because they never said exactly when the man fell. The guy notices that the word night flashes in the words of all the witnesses, but it is unclear why they all assume that the attack took place at this time of day. The villagers lied because their spirit of solidarity is strong. They knew who the culprit was and tried their best to hide his name even from the nobles. The hero, like an ordinary hillbilly, understands why people did this. Plunging into his thoughts, the main character tries to come to some conclusion. Then he says that the criminal is a significant figure among the villagers. He is the one who introduces himself to all the nobles when they arrive. The young man looks at the hunched man behind him and asks the village headman if he understands what he's talking about. The interlocutor, covering his tired eyes, suddenly starts laughing and says that nothing can be hidden from the main character. The girl asks the elder with regret in her eyes, why did he do that? The head of the village replies that he had a simple motive, because Gals wanted to kill all and force Mireille to marry. The dark-haired man continues to say that he is very grateful to the guy for everything he has done. He loves every inhabitant of this village like his own child, so he simply cannot close his eyes to the words of Gals. Mrs. Mule and the butler watch the conversation. and then ask where the crime weapon is because they did not find it. The young man is interested in whether the tool was a rock of rock salt and then asks to confirm his words. The headman looks very surprised. The man says that he did not expect anything else from the main character, then reports that he is right and it really was rock salt. A lot of it was prepared for the festival. Then it was simply dissolved in water. The girl in the hat confidently reports that they have finally found the weapon of the crime. The situation makes the butler laugh. Then he says that now the whole truth has come true. The Countess confidently says that she has heard goblins and orcs attacking the village lately, then asks if this is true. The headman does not understand what is being discussed. The man continues that sometimes orcs come out of the forest in small groups, but they do not cause much harm. But Miss Mula continues to bend her line and say that it was because of them that the weapon and witnesses were not found. With a sly expression on her face, the Countess informs that the wound on Mr. Philila's head is very similar to the wound from a baton that orcs often carry with them, after which she looks for confirmation in Albus's eyes. Albus raises his head up and laughs, then he says that it really was just a monster attack. The girl is right. All these words perplex the village headman. Mrs. Mule asks the butler to help her compile a report on this crime. He replies that he will do everything himself, but everything is extremely simple because they have already decided that the second son of the Marquis was attacked by orcs at night. The gray-haired man turns a sly look at the girl and looks into her eyes, claiming that he will fulfill any whim for her donations. The interlocutor says that she does not mind, but how expensive it will cost her. The Countess bows her head thoughtfully. Then, with a thoughtful squint, looks behind her back and asks if the fact that the village will go to the capital will be considered payment. This sudden suggestion surprises the young man. The butler replies that her offer sounds very tempting, so he cannot refuse it. The girl, in turn, replies that she has been taking care of the village for a long time, so he must repay her in kind. The village headman begins to shout in indignation that only he should be punished for the crime. A personable man with a sly smile informs that the attempted murder of the Count's son is a serious crime. Therefore, not only the head of the village, but also the civilians themselves may suffer. Then, the butler asks the headman for permission to help him and his village, so he just has to humbly follow their plan. Then he asks if they understood him. The headman is reassured by saying that if the village goes to the Duchy of Atoms, then everything will be fine, because they do not think about money and power there, and this is a huge rarity among the aristocrats. There is no better place to live. But even if the main character refuses, sooner or later such aristocrats as gals will come for him, and not only he, but the whole village as a whole will suffer. The young man sighs and says that he heeded all the arguments because he loves the village and all its inhabitants, and is also obliged to Mrs. Mule, so he agrees with the proposal. The headman bows his head in front of the young man again and says that all this is happening because of him, and then asks the guy for forgiveness. Al throws up his hands and claims that the main character in this village should not bow his head so easily because he was thinking about the main character and the safety of Nure. He just wanted to do the right thing. The guy ends his monologue by asking another time to do without bad actions and solve everything peacefully. The headman responds with another thank you. The next day, it was announced that the Marquis of Philael's son had been attacked by monsters, and the few villagers who knew the truth remained silent all their lives about what really happened. Soon, Mr. Gals woke up and remembered what really happened to him. But Mrs. Mule gently made it clear to him that if he tried to do something, she would remind him what his butler had done. The incident was resolved, and the harvest festival still went well despite what happened. According to the results of the voting, the shop owned by Mireille in the village took the first place. In a couple of days, the main character had to go to the Duchy of Atoms. His parents came out to see him off, who insisted that he eat well, and the young man promised them to bring souvenirs from the capital. The headman says that it is not easy for the villagers to live in the capital, but he believes that the young man will succeed. But everyone will wait for his return. The guy thanks me for such kind words. A girl he knows runs up to the young man and informs him that she will try to become a good bride by his return from the duchy. These words surprise the hero. Owl glances at the woman from behind, thinking that he plans to return next spring and does not understand what his mother is up to, while the latter makes an innocent appearance. Without warning, Mireille approaches the young man and kisses him on the cheek. After that, the guy stands with his eyes wide open. The main character holds his cheek and looks indignantly at the girl. She, also embarrassed, says that this is her magic charm, which will not allow him to seduce beauties in the capital. It's time for the young man to leave, and he begins to approach the gate that leads to the exit from the city. Then his girlfriend stops him and says that she almost forgot something. The girl hands the guy a neatly folded letter and asks him to open it as soon as he arrives in the capital. Al is surprised that Mireille wrote a message for him. The young man's face expresses suspicion because he thinks that all this is a joke, not understanding why they wrote him a letter. He assumes that his mother is embarrassed to say something, so she decided to communicate it this way. The main character goes to the carriage, then stops and waves to his family and girlfriend, who shout after him phrases about making his way happy. As soon as the young man sits down in the carriage next to Albus, he informs that since he has been busy all these days, they have not been able to talk calmly and discuss why the village is needed in the duchy. The guy confidently reports that he was definitely called to another locality, definitely not so that he could rest there. The butler informs me that he is, of course, right. Albus informs that the young lady wants to eat the food that the village cooks every day, so we came up with the idea that the main character would teach their chefs all his recipes. Of course, all this with generous payment. The young man reports that he expected something like this, but then assures that his products are obviously of expensive quality. To this, the servant of the young duchess responds with confidence so that he does not ask an exorbitant price for it. After a long conversation, Mr. Albus taught the young man how to drive a carriage. Then he told a little about the capital and the upcoming work for the young man. Eventually, the pair of heroes began to approach the duchy. She is admired by the main character, and he enthusiastically informs her that the capital is huge. Al finally opens the letter and says that his mother asked him to read this message as soon as he arrives in the capital, so while they are driving, it's time to do it. After that, his scream echoes across the field. The first lines of the letter say that the mother is writing a message to her dear son who must have already reached the capital. This letter is about the village itself. The woman continues to write that, no matter how you look at it, her son is an incredibly gifted child, and she, as a mother, does not want his knowledge of this world to be limited only to a small village. It was because of her past thoughts that she asked Mr. Albus for the opportunity to take the entrance exams to the Ruins Magic Academy located in the capital, admission to which will begin in the spring. The message goes on to say that Al, after 3 years of studying at the academy, and after studying, he should go on a trip to see the world as well as earn more money. Mom also informed the young man about Mirai. She came to her and asked her to teach her how to become a better wife, so she started training. But if the guy finds a better girl, then Mom will take care of his girlfriend. Before admission, the young man was allowed to stay in the duchy. But as soon as he enters, he can move to the academy dormitory and provide for himself completely on his own. Finally, the young man understood the meaning of his girlfriend's words, which she told him just before leaving, but is also outraged that his family forgot to ask his opinion on this matter. He thinks Mom realized that since he agreed to a trip to the capital, he definitely wants to enter the Magic Academy, and it would be nice to see the world. He knows that his mother is a wise and understanding woman. The guy understands that he agrees with all the proposals because the Duchy of Adams does not seem to be bad people yet, so why not settle down in the royal capital for a while? Albus pays attention to the young man next to him and asks if he has read the letter to the end, and also assures that he hopes for their long-term cooperation. The village confirms that apparently it has been connected with their family for a long time. The butler laughingly informs them that they will talk about admission to the Magic Academy next year. Now they will arrive soon. The young man is fascinated by how huge the Duke's house is. As soon as Ald enters, all the servants line up in front of him, thereby greeting him. Then the guy is escorted to a room allocated for him and later taken to the bathroom. After the bath procedures, the main character is escorted to the dining room where he is presented with magnificent dishes made from a variety of products. Albus, watching the young man eat, asks if he is happy with his stay in the mansion. He, in turn, does not find words with which to describe their house. After eating, the young man is escorted to the young lady. She appears in front of the guy, greets him, and introduces herself, saying her name is Adams von Allestrad, indicating that she is the eldest daughter of the Adams family. The girl apologizes in advance for her rudeness, but asks if he is the real creator of the cookies. Al apologizes in advance for his disrespectful language, saying that he is a commoner. The next second, the guy hands the young lady a basket of muffins, offering her to try his pastries. Then the young lady takes a bite of one of the cookies. The eldest daughter of the Addams family grabs the main character by the hands, saying that this is exactly what she needs, and she also says that she cannot believe that a child invented it, but she is very glad to meet them. The young man is embarrassed and says that he is also glad to meet the Duchess, who says that she can be called simply Alice, and also says that you cannot communicate with her respectfully. The girl insists that she invited the hero here, so he is her property, and also assures that her family treats the commoners with respect, so they will not demand from him what he has not been trained in. All looking back at the butler says that since Alice allows it, from that day on he will live in her duchy until the spring of next year, and also says that he is very glad to meet the young lady. The girl is embarrassed by such words of the young man and says that he is still too respectful to her, but they are the same age as him. The guy agrees and asks permission to ask her one question. The main character asks the question that tormented him the whole trip. Why the young Duchess wanted to see him. She, in turn, answers that there were several reasons for this. At first, Alice declares that she had a natural curiosity. She was interested in seeing the person who created something new in the confectionery industry, and she also has a small request. The girl says that she would like to ask him for help in organizing a banquet that is soon to be held at their estate. The young Duchess promises that she will pay for all expenses and his participation, and would also like him to teach his recipes to the chefs in her house. But of course, he can cook everything himself, although her birthday is only 2 weeks away. The main character looks at her indignantly and understands why he was brought here and what is really needed from him. But he decides to put up with everything, because he will live there until spring. So he decides to tell all the recipes. The guy understands that for a birthday he needs a cake. In the world where he found himself, no one has baked it yet. He has not heard about it. The village is also confident that since it has a lot of chefs at its disposal, its capabilities will increase. Then the young man concludes that, since his customer is the Duchess, he can curry favor with her, and if anything, he can ask her for help. He thinks it's a pretty lucrative exchange. The main character slowly nods his head and says that he agrees with the proposal of the young Duchess. She, in turn, folds her hands in front of her and is very happy. The young man spreads his hands and says that they can discuss the details of the banquet later, and now he asks the butler and his mistress for fresh milk and eggs. Alice happily says that they bought a couple with a bag of sugar at a sale. But the guy says that you shouldn't worry, because he can use his own. With these words, the guy surprises both the Duchess and Albus. They ask the young man that it was really he who supplied high-quality sugar to the capital. The village asks to keep this information a secret. The servant of the Duchy of Addams says that, of course, he will keep this secret, but all the nobles in the capital are chasing sugar. The girl asks who the young man really is. The guy smiles sheepishly, then starts laughing awkwardly and claims that he is an ordinary farmer. After this conversation, hectic days began for the main character. At first, the cooks in the kitchen at the Duke's house treated him with hostility. But once he was in the kitchen, respect for him increased. The kitchen staff began to admire the young man. After a while, they began to consider him the head chef. A few minutes later, Alice appeared in the kitchen and, noticing the prototypes of new dishes, immediately ate them with an expression of satisfaction on her face. The number of people invited to the ball was 500, which was a huge, large-scale event. While Al was preparing samples of the dishes, he also served them to the Duke and Duchess, who turned out to be pleasant people. They also held a meeting with Mr. Albus, the cooks, and the servants in order to carefully plan the dishes that would be served at the ball. There were about 500 guests in total, and therefore it was necessary to carefully consider how many and what dishes to cook. This was complicated by the fact that some ingredients were in limited quantities. Of the sweets, the council of servants settled on an apple pie, since there was enough dough and apples and the servants liked the pie. Over the past few days, the maids have often visited the kitchen, approaching the hero and asking him what kind of girls he likes. But it may be that they were interested in him just out of politeness. The main character also asked Alice not to appear in the kitchen anymore, which caused her displeasure. But then he explained that it was her birthday, so everyone wanted to surprise her, but she wouldn't let them do it. And so the days of the young chef passed, with less and less time left for the birthday every day. After the menu was agreed upon and the ingredients were ordered and were supposed to arrive tonight, It means that the village had a day off for the first time in a long time. Since the young man is resting today, he first decided to go to someplace. Later, he met with Mr. Lebrant, who was very glad that the hero had come to the capital. The guy told his story, ending it with the words that this is how he started working for the Duchy of Atoms. The man complains that the young man had a hard time and offers his help if he needs it. The genius chef smiles happily, because he has achieved what he started the conversation for, and says that he has a request for an old acquaintance. These words surprised the long-haired man. At the end of the conversation with Mr. Lebrant, the young man decided to go to the realtor's office. He goes in there, greets and says that he wants to rent a house. After the birthday, the work of the village and the duchy was completed. Of course, he was allowed to live in the mansion until spring, but he did not want to burden anyone with his presence. He also wants to live for himself and not be overloaded with work. And since he lives alone in the capital, he certainly needs a house. The guy calls out to the realtor again, who informs him that he is already on his way to him. The agency employee is surprised, because a child came to his office. All says that he wants to rent a house or a room that will be near the academy, but the man is not sure that he can rent a room to a child. The guy hands the realtor a paper that was given to him in the duchy and asks him to look at it. The man is surprised, reads, and sees how important this document is. The agency employee apologizes for the rudeness shown and asks for a minute to give him a great option. At this time, the guy is glad that he did not consult Albus in vain earlier. A little later, a huge 2-story building appears in front of the guy, sparkling with its luxury and cleanliness. The man asks the main character what he thinks about this house. The employee says that this is a 2-story mansion with 4 rooms, a garden, and a well. It's only 20 minutes away from the academy on foot, and most importantly, it's just a huge living room. This is the best option. The young man is surprised that the main room is really huge, about 25 square meters. A sofa would fit there. He considers this place just a fairy tale. The price of such a gorgeous place, if you mean rent, is 45 gold per month, and if the village decides to buy it, it will pay about 9,000. Considering all the charms of the house, the hero sees no reason to refuse. The main character is still thinking, but then remembers that the duchy itself recommended this realtor, so he agrees and buys a house. The man offers to discuss the details of the contract, but then the employee is surprised because he thought that the guy meant rent, not purchase. But the young man takes out his savings and offers to pay the entire amount at once. Soon, furniture appeared in the young man's new place of residence. Now the guy began to call it his dream home. He remembers that he had to present the Duke's letter to the man in the furniture store again. The young man looks around and thinks that he is not sure if the letter was the reason. But all the furniture looked very luxurious, although, of course, he gave a lot of money for it. And also, while in the store, he felt nostalgic when he saw a fox mask in the window. It was as if she had come from Japan itself, where the hero lived before his rebirth in this world. The young man had only to protect the house from the cold. He could use magic for this, but it would not look as elegant as he wants. Later, the guy decides to go into the blacksmith shop, where he sees a huge man working on something, and then he apologizes for disturbing him. The bearded man looks back at the young man and says that he does not understand what a heater is, and asks again what it is. The main character understands that this technology must not exist in this world, so the guy starts making a drawing, showing how the device should look, which surprises the blacksmith because there is an unusual design. The man is interested in what is the budget for the manufacture of a heater. The young man replies that if the limit exceeds 100 gold, then it's okay. The blacksmith informs them that they will use the Grand's ore. This is a special ore extracted from the Grand's volcano. It is highly resistant to fire and has a fairly reasonable price. The entire manufacture of the new device will take 3 days. Of course, it can be made of iron, but then the heater will not last long. The young man says that they have agreed. The guy asks what his new friend's name is, and the latter, remembering that he did not introduce himself, says that his name is Garvons, but you can call him Gar. The young man calls his name in response. The young man thinks that the day was long enough, but it flew by unnoticed. He believes that the products that were ordered for the banquet should have already been delivered. The young man realizes that, as expected from the duchy, the goods were of the best quality. He should try these 2 days to surprise the young duchess. From the next morning, all the servants began preparations. It all started with snacks, and the main dishes were prepared in the late afternoon. Everyone exceeded their task and managed to prepare everything by the deadline. It remains only to wait for the holiday. On the night before the celebration, when everyone had already gone to bed, 3 people in black cloaks ran through the backyard of the estate. The maid let them inside the house, saying that everything was clean. The men decided that they needed to move forward quickly before anyone noticed them. They made their way into the kitchen and went to the refrigerator, where the dishes for tomorrow's birthday were stored. A cry is heard throughout the palace, which calls the lord of the village. The young man sees that the cooks are running to him, saying that trouble and something terrible has happened. The guy runs into the kitchen and sees the devastation there. Pots and ingredients are scattered all over the room. Everything is in dust and dirt. The boy looks at one of the chefs, saying that a nightmare happened, but yesterday everything was fine. He asks what happened here. An adult man says that thieves broke into the kitchen at night. This causes incomparable surprise on the face of the main character. The cook says with understanding that the door was opened from the inside. Before going to bed, they put experienced guards in the kitchen, but all of them, as one, fell asleep abruptly. And the maid who was hired on the eve of the ball suddenly disappeared. The employee of the ducal house continues to say that someone intended to disrupt the ball. There is no doubt about it. The young man asks what the damage is. The man replies that in addition to food and groceries, dishes and all alcohol were destroyed. The young man understands that this is a complete failure. The score of the first daughter of the Duchy of Adams will be held very soon, but they don't have any drinks or food. Even as a commoner, he is aware of the horror of the situation. But then the guy stops worrying, pulls himself together, and asks Mr. Albus because he urgently needs eggs, milk, dishes, and alcohol. He says it should all be delivered to him within an hour. The young man tells all the chefs to pull themselves together, as they still have time. It's only 6 in the morning, and the ball will start at midnight. The chefs are stunned because there are no main ingredients. The young man puts his hands in front of him, and suddenly, in front of the dumbfounded servants, all the ingredients they need begin to appear as if out of thin air. The main character repeats that the ingredients are his concern, and he also hopes that the employees of the Addams family remember the recipes. The chef says that of course they will definitely be able to cook everything. The guy remembers that there were hunting supplies in his vault, which were just in case. But there is no choice, so you will have to use them and cook from what you have. He orders the cooks to get down to business. They obediently order the servants to bring the ingredients, then very synchronously and amicably begin to cut food for the future holiday. Chefs, showing all their skills accumulated over many years of working with such a noble house, begin heat treatment of food, then they skillfully spread it on plates. The young man watches all this, but then complains that no matter how hard they try, they manage to cook the meat. He hopes to find a way to reduce the cooking time. The main character sees something similar to a black baking sheet. He grabs it in his hands and says that this is the solution to all their problems. The next second, the guy shouts that he takes over all the meat dishes. The chef does not understand how he will cook all the dishes alone. He says that he will not have time. The young man promises to show his colleagues a new way of cooking at today's ball. In the meantime, he asks them not to be distracted. Suddenly, Mr. Albus runs into the kitchen. He calls out to the young man and asks how he is doing. He says that he managed to get eggs and milk, but failed to get alcohol and dishes because they were sold out everywhere. The main character asks who could have bought it all, because it's strange that it was sold out in one evening. The butler says that everything was acquired by the Segusi Trading Company, which is in business relations with the Filale family. The young man clarifies that it was a member of this family who was the man they recently found unconscious near his house. The butler confirms his words. The young man speculates that this could be revenge on the Duchy of Adams. The guy thinks that it all looks like one big trap and soon they should appear in front of them. Then a servant runs into the kitchen and asks Mr. Butler to leave the house because the merchants from the trading company have arrived. The young man informs Mr. Butler that he will go with him to talk with the guests who have arrived. Then he turns to the chef and says that he leaves the management of the kitchen to him. 3 people enter the main doors of the mansion. They are surprised that the senior butler himself came to meet them. They say that Mrs. Alice's birthday is today, but they suddenly ran out of food, dishes, and alcohol. Standing behind the butler, the young man clicks and realizes that now everything has fallen into place. He comes to the conclusion that it is the filial family. competing with the Addams family, that is involved in this. The guy whispers his plan in the ear of Mr. Albus, who, in turn, asks if they are exactly representatives of the Sagasi Trading Company, and waits for them to confirm it. A second later, the butler says that everything is in perfect order. They are also informed that they do not need the goods of these merchants. This causes great surprise to the three men. Later, the gray-haired man turns around and tells them to look for customers elsewhere. This causes indignation on the faces of the people who came to them. They say the people on the estate will regret it. The uninvited guests turn around and leave through the same main door they came through. The butler looks at the young man and says that he did as he asked. The young man asks not to worry, because he will soon understand everything. But suddenly, both heroes hear someone coming down the stairs to them. It turns out to be one of the servants of the Addams house, who shouts and calls the head butler. The employee informs them that this time a representative from the Lebrant trading house came to them. This puts the butler in a stupor. He sees baskets of food and drinks appear in front of him one by one. The gray-haired man asks how he could have guessed that this would happen. The young man replies that Mr. Lebrant is a very good friend of his, which is why he asked him for a favor. I suspected that he would need help. The butler asks if the young man knew that such a thing could happen. He, in turn, replies that he was just being overly cautious. No more, but complains that he could not get the right alcohol. The young man reports that he recently decided to try to make his own wine, which is neatly placed in a wicker basket, and offers the butler to try it. The man replies that this is quite unusual because he is quite young to drink alcohol, but still decided to cook it. Then the young man gives the man a glass with a drink. The main servant in the house declares that the wine has a very rich taste, so now they will buy his wine in bulk. The young man announces that he agrees to such a generous offer, then claiming that they have agreed on this matter. The men who had previously tried to sell goods in the house are wondering what they should do now, because the young gentleman said that they would have to wait only a few minutes, and people from this estate would come running to them. Suddenly, three merchants are hailed by a masked man and says that he will buy back all their goods. They do not understand who he is. He replies that if they do not sell the goods, the ingredients will quickly deteriorate. The masked man says he will buy back everything they have for 100 gold pieces. The merchants are indignant. They say that this is robbery in broad daylight, because all these goods are worth about 30,000 gold. The unknown man says that he personally does not care how much money they demand from him, but the count gave them the money, and it would be ridiculous if they returned to him completely without funds. The young man enjoys the indignation that flaunts on the faces of the merchants. They begin to bargain, offering 10,000 gold for all the products. But the guy also did not miss. His final price was 300 gold. The strange guy in the mask only assumed that they would agree, but they really borrowed Count Falela's amount. The men, who introduced themselves as merchants, began to trudge towards the exit, not knowing what to do next. The main character turns out to be under the fox mask. He realizes that the ball will start soon, so it's time for him to return to the kitchen. The kitchen is full of life. Everyone is trying to cook stolen dishes. The young man bursts into the workspace and apologizes to everyone for waiting. People begin to approach him and say that they thought that Mr. All had completely abandoned them. This causes embarrassment for the guy. The young man asks how things are going. The chef replies that everything is ready and displayed in the hall except for meat dishes. All promises to take care of them right away, then pulls the tablecloth off the unusual device. The guy puts a piece of meat on the stove he made and he immediately starts grumbling. The cook asks what kind of new cooking method this is that the young man wanted to show him. The guy confirms his words. All calls this method of cooking live cooking, because he creates his dishes right in front of the guests, who begin to come closer and closer to him to enjoy a new sight for them. The main character puts a mask on his face and thinks that he needs to keep his identity. A crowd of guests invited to the young lady's birthday party begins to gather around him. He adds a second piece of meat to the stove. The next second, the young man uncorks a bottle of wine of his own production and pours it directly on the meat, after which a high flame rises. Then he announces that the first steak is ready, and a queue immediately lines up behind him, and a hubbub of voices rises because everyone wants to try it first. The young man's hands flutter over his new device. He quickly cooks the meat so that everyone gets a small piece, but then Kadir's voice is heard saying that the main character of the celebration has arrived. A girl in a beautiful fluffy dress begins to walk down the stairs, riveting all the attention of the assembled guests to her person. But then the girl gets distracted for a second and looks at what is happening in the center of the banquet hall. The main character is standing there and frying meat on an unusual device, which she had not seen before. The next moment, the eldest daughter of the Adams house raises her hand to her new acquaintance, with whom they have managed to make friends for a long time. He responds in kind. Everyone in their head starts complaining that they, of course, face some difficulties, but overall, things went great. The main character heard that many people asked the maids where they got so much delicious food. But they said mildly that only the head butler knew about it, and Mr. Albus was not the type to betray him to others. The hero looks at the butler, who is tired because of the long preparation, and then because of the problems that have arisen, and thinks that Albus can be counted on in terms of keeping the secret. The guy notices that desserts were particularly popular at the party. They were dismantled in the blink of an eye. The highlight of the evening was, of course, the birthday cake, which was prepared especially for the birthday girl. She was the one who had the honor to take the first bite. The girl really liked the cake. After the girl brings a piece of cake to her mouth and swallows it, she informs that it is very tasty. There are tears in her eyes from such splendor. The girl turns an embarrassed look at the main character, meekly pronounces his name, and cordially thanks the one who gave her such a gorgeous birthday. The guy congratulates the eldest daughter of the Adams house on her birthday and begins to clap his hands, which, later, is picked up by all the invited guests. That's how the evening at the duchy ended. It was night outside when all the guests left the estate and the party was over. The young man decides to sit down and relax on the couch in one of the halls of the house. Then the butler comes up to him. The gray-haired man says that the village did a great job today, who in turn says that Mr. Albus also did a great job. Then it comes to the fee. All the merits of cooking and helping in the organization are taken into account. Here, the butler reports that the amount is about 300 platinum coins and asks if the young man agrees with such money. The family also undertakes to pay a fine if at least one of the recipes is disclosed. In his head, the guy calculates that 300 platinum coins is 300 million yen and believes that the amount is too large. The main servant of the house assures that the recipes will indeed change their diet, and this amount also includes compensation for the stressful situation that was created due to a competing family. The butler also informs that the gentleman of his house really liked the wine that was prepared by the guy. He says they still have 5 barrels left, but the head wants to buy 10 more from him. The young man's gaze turns sly after a second. He thinks it's a great idea that they want to buy back the wine he made. It's a pretty good deal. The guy smiles happily and says that since they liked his wine, he sees no point in denying them the sale. The butler enjoys his words and says that he made the right choice. Thus, literally in one evening, the young man became fabulously rich, and he also got a permanent source of income. He thinks it's convenient to have a connection with the duchy after all. The next day, the village stands in front of the ducal family. The head says that he is leaving them today. They are grateful for everything he has done for them. If he gets into a difficult situation, their family will always help him. The lady of the Adams family reports that his desserts were incredibly delicious, so she asks him to come and cook as soon as he has free time. They also mention his wine, saying that it is very tasty. Alice says that Albus told her about what the young man had to go through before her birthday, but she is glad that he completely coped and is very grateful to him for the holiday that was arranged for her. The girl regretfully lowers her head down and says it's time for him to leave. The guy doesn't understand why the eldest daughter of the Adams family is so upset. His new friend puts her hand to her chest and can't start a conversation in any way. She asks the hero for permission to fulfill her wish. The guy says he's leaving, but he can still cook sweets for the girl if she wants to. The girl in turn, of course, agrees with such a generous offer. The little lady grabs the guy by the hand, squeezes it tightly, and promises that as soon as her cookies are finished, she will, of course, come to visit him. Albus goes out to say goodbye to the young man, thanks him for his work, and asks what he plans to do. The guy says that he doesn't even know, because he didn't have any special plans, and asks for recommendations. The butler asks for a few seconds to think, and says that he usually does not offer this, because classes are not suitable for everyone. But given the abilities of the main character, does he want to go to the maze? The butler's words cause great surprise to the young man. Strange images appear in his head about some kind of cave with bones and skulls, and he exclaims what kind of maze this is. There are about 108 labyrinths in Arttoria. This is a special place in the form of a dungeon that is teeming with monsters. Besides the danger, ancient treasures can be found there. Many take such risks for the sake of profit. There is one such maze not far from the capital. Maze number 4. They are given numbers from 1 to 10 depending on their difficulty. At the moment, 53 floors are open in this maze. Only people over the age of 15, as well as those who have an adventurer's license, can enter the mazes. But Albus came there with the main character and put in a good word for him, and they let him through. The young man found himself in front of a huge road that seemed as if it had been carved inside a huge rock. The young man picked up the first stick he saw from the floor, considering it his weapon, and thought he needed to see how far he could go. On every 5th floor of the labyrinths, there is a mini-boss who is guaranteed to protect something valuable. The hero hopes that he will be able to defeat more than a few of them. The young man begins to cast a spell, concentrating, calling to his inner strength. He invokes a spell of body strengthening, detection, concealment of presence, and spatial vision. After the guy has finished working with magic, he starts running towards his goal, shouting that he is moving forward. As you move through the maze, the hero faces his first test. These are the strange inhabitants of stone walls in the form of slugs. He copes with them with the help of a stick that he picked up at the beginning of the cave. The main character realizes that, as he thought, the opponents on the first floors are quite light, so he copes with one stick. He believes that it is necessary to continue fighting in the same spirit. After 4 levels are completed, the young man gets to the 5th floor where the room of the main boss is located, and it turns out to be something similar to a mountain troll with a huge sword on the edge. The young man looks at the one who appeared in front of him. It turns out to be a huge goblin, but because of his crown on his head, it can be assumed that he is the king of goblins. The latter starts screaming at the guy. The guy gathers all his forces together and, putting his hands forward, releases magic in the form of a water spear, which shoots directly into the opponent's chest. After the impact, only dust remains around the field where the battle took place. But the young man realizes that the battle is not over, so he stands in a fighting position and asks the opponent to attack him. But as soon as the smoke from the mutual strong attacks dissipates, the main character sees that only the crown remains of the goblin, which now lies alone on the rocks of the cave. Everything that is happening causes great surprise to the young man. He thinks it's very strange how easy it was for him. He believes that he will not meet intelligent opponents in the top 10 floors. After defeating the monster, a young man with a joyful gleam in his eyes sees a chest in the corner of the cave and goes to it. After the chest is opened, a white bag is found in it. Looking inside the bag he won, the young man discovers small seeds of an unknown plant there, which he subsequently pours onto his hand. With a little disappointment, shaking out the seeds, the guy thinks that this maze is a storehouse for farmers, even though he himself is one. After defeating the monster on the 5th floor, the young man ascends to the 6th floor and sees in front of him a huge, calm field surrounded by great mountains. The guy raises his head up and realizes that, although he is underground, he sees the sky, feels a different atmosphere here. He thinks that every 5 floors the environment will change. The meadow where the main character found himself reminds him of his native village, which he left not so long ago. If you think about it that way, he hasn't let her out of space since the day he arrived in the capital. The young man releases his magic bee from his embrace. He calls her Quinn and orders her to fly freely. The bee turns to the young man, as if greeting him, and turns out to be several times larger than an ordinary insect. All invites her to sit on his shoulder and says that he is also very glad to see her. To tell the truth, the young man thought of leaving his favorite insect in the village. But she categorically refused and he had to take her with him. The young man says that he intends to go down further and asks if Quinn will go with him. She tells him that she wants to fly here, so the young man says that he will meet her later and asks her to be careful. Slowly but surely, the young men reach the 10th floor. He enters the monster's room there, where animals similar to werewolves are found. Then he begins to fight them. After winning on this floor, a piece of cloth falls on the young man. He picks it up and realizes that it is an item from the boss. It turns out to be a cloak. Then he wraps it up and sees a new chest, comes up and, opening the lid, sees that there are seeds inside. Then the young man immediately goes up to the 11th floor, where he finds himself in a swampy area where the bright sun is not visible. On the 12th and 13th floors, the young man is in even more danger than before. Therefore, the guy confirms his words that the lower he descends, the harder his enemies become. On the 15th floor, in the boss's room, a strange transparent cloud begins to attack the village. It suddenly appears in front of him, and then appendages begin to grow out of it. These appendages, which are becoming more and more every second, are trying to grab the stick of the main character. But the young man manages to dodge, saying that this opponent of his is very fast. The guy has to jump from place to place very quickly because he moves very sharply. The young man realizes that this monster uses whip-like attacks. Suddenly, the main character realizes that physically attacks do not work at all on this type of monster. After all, his stick does not cause any damage to this creature at all. The guy looks at the monster attacking him with a serious look and says that this is exactly the kind of emotions he expected from visiting the maze. It's a pity that such enemies began to appear only on the 15th floor. In the next second, appendages began to pounce on the young man, attacking him from all sides. The main character, setting himself up for a serious battle, easily reflects the attacks of this monster. At the same time, he says that he is still not strong enough compared to him. The guy decides to use magic, since physically the attacks don't work. He flies up and casts a thunder rain spell. After that, clouds gather in the sky and lightning strikes the monster. The young man lands on the ground after such a strong attack. He sees the haze from the lightning dissipate, and there is no trace of the monster for which the attack was intended. The young man looks at the dispersing mist and says that this creature does not seem to have protection against lightning strikes. With enviable enthusiasm, the guy starts rummaging through the chest, which was guarded by a monster. He thinks that because the enemies have become stronger, the rewards have become better. A young man wrapped in a black cloak is very disappointed when he finds seeds again, although he is, in fact, a farmer. Fighting the monsters that are on the 16th floor, the young man still complains about the bad rewards that lie in the chests located in the dungeon. Even being on the 17th floor, the main character still cannot understand why the seeds are there, although he believes that there is nothing wrong with them. Later, while fighting the creatures located on the 18th floor, the young man still thinks that the chests create unjustified expectations. Even while fighting on the 17th floor, the guy had high hopes that after defeating a strong enemy, he would get some kind of treasure. Of course, he wants to get something cool in return for winning. The monster who lives on the 20th floor turns out to be a multi-winged eagle, whose furious gaze is directed straight at the guy, all starting to fight with him. Hopes that, at least this time, he will not receive seeds. After all, he protects, puts his strength into clearing the maze, and they just mock him. The hero tells the monster flying above him that he apparently controls the lightning, so he wants to check whose lightning will be stronger, for which he uses the thunder rain spell. The next second, the sky darkens and begins to spew lightning, which forcefully hits the eagle, which is in a bent state trying to dodge. The eagle rises and stands to its full height, surprising the young man, because it turned out that one of the animal's abilities was the ability to absorb spells. The eagle flies up, shining with sparks. The magical creature that the young man had to fight on the 15th floor sends a lightsaber at him. It is very impressive for a young man to stand with his mouth open. The guy tries to put up a barrier faster, raising his hands up and covering his eye. The monster's spell hits its shield, which consists of several parts for greater durability. After the magic of the spell dissipates, the young man decides to use his other sorcery, asking what his opponent thinks about him. A sphere of light appears in the young man's open hand, around which lightning flies. The main character already raises both hands up and says that the Thunder Dragon must accept his challenge. From the magic that was in the young man's body, a huge magical creature begins to form. The young man orders the dragon, consisting of thunder sparks, which he has just created, to rush to attack the enemy. He obeys him and flies ferociously towards the eagle. The dragon, summoned by the young man for protection, wraps around his winged opponent. He squeezes it with all his strength, which causes a scream to come out of the monster's mouth. The magical creature, along with its opponent, falls loudly to the ground, which is why it is torn apart, forming a small crater. The next second after the dragon has almost defeated the eagle, at least by immobilizing it, the young man summons a stone chain that wraps around the opponent's entire body. The guy is on a small hill located above his opponent and tells Tom that he will not escape from him now. All thinks that only the final blow remains to be struck, but he is distracted by the feather, which slowly falls off from his right side. The young man carefully grabs the falling feather by its tip and carefully examines it, thinking that it is quite interesting. The young man remembers that the Goblin King dropped his crown on the 5th floor. Usually, after a victory, the monster's body completely dissolves into dust, but the eagle still has feathers. The main character carefully picks up all the parts left over from the wings and plumage of the bird he recently fought and joyfully continues his journey. Now he realized that if he killed the boss instantly, everything on his body would disappear. But if the boss is weakened or the thing is taken away from his body, then it will not disappear after his death, as happened with the feathers. When the young man realized such a simple truth, he decided that he needed to go back, because there were many goblins on the previous floors, so he could kill everyone by collecting meat with fangs, and then sell it all to the duchy. After a short break, a fairly good catch appears in front of the guy, which consists of claws, fangs, feathers, and several pieces of meat. The young man wipes the sweat from his forehead, and the next second says that he was able to collect as much as 100 kilograms of selected meat at a time, and now he knows how to fight monsters, getting benefits for himself. The main character says that he is ready to forgive the maze if he sees the seeds there again. He remembers that he is now on the 16th floor, so he decides to go back for his bee and go downstairs. A sudden loud sound, similar to a scream, distracts the village from calmly continuing its journey and causes its surprise. The young man, from his experience, notices that the scream that echoed in the silence of the thicket was human. Therefore, he begins to run in the direction from which it was carried. Running out into the clearing where the battle is taking place, the guy sees that some knight in armor is fighting with huge orcs and their small servants, and a girl who looks like a cat is lying next to him. After the guy passes between the trees, the view improves for him. He realizes that he has found himself in a clearing where the battle between monsters and adventurers is going on with the last of his strength. The young man sees that a group of adventurers are fighting in front of him, but they were defeated to the nines, and the strength of the last knight remaining on his feet is already running out. A second later, he turns his attention to a girl with cat ears on her head. She squints and looks blindly in front of her and then asks who is in front of her. The main character puts on a fox mask, which he used for the merchant guild a few days earlier, and thinks that his stealth skills have reached a new level, but it's still worth putting on his attribute. The girl who is lying on the ground looks at the guy with a very exhausted look. She has bruises under her eyes. Even though she doesn't know who she's talking to, she's asking for help. Looking around, the young man counts everyone and concludes that the group consisted of 4 people. 3 can no longer fight. Their leader can barely stand on his feet. The young man begins to run away to help everyone, because if he does nothing, the adventurers who are trapped will forever remain in this maze, but they will be dead. The main character runs forward and comes to the defense of a young man who can barely stand on his feet. All the monsters start coming at him. After all begins to work his magic, summoning balls of lightning into his hand, the guy whose protection he rushed to asks him who he is. On the orcs and trolls, who were already about to attack the young man, the thunder rain, which was called upon by them earlier, falls. This causes monsters to roast while standing still. The blonde stranger who almost died is very surprised that his defender casts such a spell without reading. It also has a huge mass of damage. The monsters began to fall. The main character notices that after his sparkling attack, there was only one survivor. He is a red ogre. He moves towards him with extraordinary speed and a loud roar. The guy gets into a fighting pose, leans forward a little, and says that he used a pretty powerful spell, but the creature turned out to be much stronger than the others. It starts attacking the village. Throwing his hand up, the guy in the black cloak begins to cast a new spell, saying that he will show the ogre something new in lightning magic. A trident begins to form above his head. The young man shouts a spell that sounds like a sparkling spear. Then he moves his hand, pointing it towards his huge opponent. The magic flies straight towards the opponent, then hits him in the very center of the forehead, causing his head to split in half. This action causes undisguised surprise among the adventurers watching him, since they had never seen such a high level of mastery of such powerful magic before. A spear made of sparkling lightning pierces through a huge monster, which causes it to fall on its stomach, dropping a huge hammer, causing a roar that resounds throughout the area. The main character looks at everything that is happening from a high point and reports that the ogre, of course, stood a little longer, but he is still far from it. Still, the monsters from the sacred mountain were much stronger. A pair of adventurers unknown to the young man, who is watching all this, says that she is saved. They allow their bodies to relax because the threat has been eliminated. The blonde knight, who tried to fight to the end, covering his eyes, thanks the young man, saying that he is glad of his help, whoever he is, and then turns his attention to his teammates. The stranger runs up to his unconscious friends and asks them to hold on. He says that the monsters have been defeated and they can safely return to the surface. The main character looks at the scene and realizes that 3 of the 4 people in a team are barely breathing, and the leader with such wounds will not be able to get everyone out. So he decides to help. The young man throws his hands in the air again, chanting a mass healing spell, after which all 4 adventurers who fought ogres before begin to come to their senses. The knight with blonde hair looks at his hands, which were previously in wounds, and says that he has completely healed from the cuts, then turns his head and sees that their savior begins to run away briskly. The rescued guy in armor begins to catch up with the village, asking him to stop and tell his name so that he knows who to thank for saving his team from the ogres. For a second, the main character thinks about it and realizes that if he doesn't answer, then maybe the guy will chase him and his friends will wake up soon. The young man in the black cloak says his name is Onin. The guy immediately begins to move away from the group of people he saved, running deep into the thicket of the forest. The main character hears the words of his new acquaintance, who thanks him and says that they are a group called the Brilliant Wing, and also that they will definitely repay him for his help in the future. Running away and not looking back at new acquaintances, All realizes that this was his first meeting with the Brilliant Wing. With the future famous elite group of adventurers of the C rank, the guy reaches the 10th floor where he had previously left his pet. He believes that he has already done one good deed for today, but is already quite late, and he thinks that is enough for today. The young man begins to call Quinn, who is his pet bee, but then a whole swarm of bees similar to his insect flies to him. The main character is very surprised by the picture presented to him. He claims that Quinn found a local nest of bees and defeated their leader. Therefore, she is perceived as the new queen bee. All smiles shyly and rejoices that, thanks to his pet, he will take away a lot more honey with him. A couple of weeks later, the main character returns to the duchy, to my house. There he decides to start making a rocking chair for himself. He completes this task safely. The young man is glad that he made soft pillows from the feathers of the monster that he defeated on the 15th floor of the maze. Thanks to this, he made a chair for himself. The hero is sure that this is the best comfortable thing to relax, calls it wonderful. The pillow is located on the back of the chair and on the seat. This ensures maximum comfort. Later, after returning from the maze, Owl found out that the multi-winged bird he defeated was a thunder eagle, a rank monster. Its feathers and meat are highly appreciated on the market. With an expression of satisfaction and comfort on his face, the young man thinks that the design and creation of the chair took about a week, but it was worth it. He thinks that he will be able to sell the development profitably, but before developing a patent, the main character decides that he needs to take care of the mess he made while he was designing a new piece of furniture for himself. The guy looks around the room and says that, although, to be honest, it is quite difficult to live alone in such a house, and even if he cleans up, this house will reappear. The young man claps his hands and joy appears in his eyes, because he decided that he would just hire someone. He is thinking about hiring a housekeeper in order to carry out his plans and make sure that the decision he made was correct. The guy understands that he needs to know the opinion of a knowledgeable person. After some time, the village is already sitting at a friend's house. He asks him for help while Mr. Lebrant inspects the rocking chair he invented with great enthusiasm. An adult man swings in an armchair and says that the main character has reinvented something incredible. It's nice to sit in this chair and the rocking is soothing. He would love to get one for his house. The guy's friend quickly approaches his face and says that he is ready to pay for this miracle with great pleasure. The interlocutor claims that he understood him, but asks to return to the topic of conversation. Mr. Lebrant argues that, regarding the housekeeper, it is better for a young man to buy her rather than hire her. With these words, he surprises the young man. The man says that a young man needs to buy a slave to meet all his needs and requirements, not only in everyday life, but also in the traveling plan. This will be especially important for him since the village itself is a special person who keeps a lot of things secret from others, and a slave has no right to go against his master. He is just useful for household duties. The main character, of course, knew that slavery is quite common in the world, where he got after his rebirth from a resident of Japan. But he did not even think about buying a slave. Mr. Lebrand claims that this will be the best option for the guy, and since he is a minor, an adult will become his guarantor during the purchase. For this, the young man thanks him. Then, from the words of his friend, the young man realizes that if he also does household chores, then who will create new items for his friend's trading house? Therefore, it is much easier for a man to help him. The main character and his old friend are approaching a 3-story building, inside which there is a store owned by the best slaver in the capital. Mr. Lebrand says that he informed the owner about the young man's visit, so he should just describe his preferences to him, and he will choose the right one for him. The boy thanks the man. A young man is finally dating a man recommended to him by a friend. He asks about the purpose of the visit and also clarifies the requirements that the young man makes to his future servant. The guy says he has minimum requirements. He wants the slave to be able to do housework, and also he plans to start an adventurer career in the future, so an ambitious companion will not hurt him. The young man puts his hand to his face and, embarrassed, says that he wants to get a man about his age and preferably female. The owner of the house writes down all the requirements so as not to miss anything in the future. A new acquaintance reports that he understood everything and does not know if his friend told the young man. But they do not take into slavery those who lost to gambling, without pedigree and with a bad character. So the young man can be calm. The store owner brings the main character to an improvised stage and informs him that he will present each of the candidates to him based on his criteria. The visitor of the trading floor is a little nervous. 7 girls appear before the young man, 5 of whom are human. There is also a dog man and a cat man. The young man hears about their special skills, age, and name, and then makes a final assessment. The owner asks what Mr. All thinks about the girls he saw. If he likes someone, he can have a personal conversation with her. The guy says that he wants to talk to 3 slaves. Slave number 4 is invited to the conversation first. The guy introduces himself, calls his name. The girl thanks that she was allowed to have a personal conversation with the young man. The main character informs that he would like to find a person who will take care of household chores, and also in the future will not be afraid to become an adventurer and go with him into the maze. The girl apologizes and complains that the hero must be wondering why she doesn't have her right eye and left hand. She declares that this does not affect her duties in any way, and she is ready to become an adventurer. The guy is glad that she is determined. He says that he is only 10 years old and also hopes that she will not be embarrassed by his age. He also wants to enter the Magic Academy this spring, so he will be quite busy. Slave number 4 says that she sees no problem in how old the young man really is. She also says that she also graduated from the Magic Academy, and if anything, she will be able to help him study there. The young man closes his eyes and concludes that the girl, of course, has lost a lot, but there is no doubt that she is talented. With her help, he can easily enter the academy. Slave number 6, whose name is Maroon, volunteered next to talk. She immediately asks who Mr. All is by origin, which puts the young man in a stupor. The guy realizes that the girl mistook him for a nobleman, while he replies that he is an ordinary commoner. But he cannot blame the dogman for her mistake. He thinks he's disappointed her a little bit. Slave number 7 has the name Yomi. She promises that she's ready to take on all the responsibilities of the house, as well as accompany the main character during his adventures. If he buys it, he won't regret it for a second. The young man thinks that the girl really has attractiveness. He also informs her that he is an ordinary commoner and asks if she has anything against it. She says she will serve him, who she was not. Summing up after meeting with the last applicant, the young man thinks that she has exceptional abilities and is a good person, and he also has no hidden intentions towards her. The store owner comes up to the hero from behind and asks who he will choose, and the guy, embarrassed in turn, informs that he has already made a decision. After a short thought, All informs that he is buying the 4th and 7th slaves as they liked him more than the others for their qualities. After a short manipulation, the shop owner informs that the pact of the slave master has been successfully concluded. Now the main character is the rightful owner of the 2 girls. The young man and his two companions go down the shopping streets, on both sides of which there are shops with various products, towards the young man's house. While they are walking, the guy is in turmoil because he still made a purchase, but now he does not understand how to handle slaves. The young man does not realize what he should do with them at all. Two girls who are walking a little behind abruptly approach the main character and ask if he is okay since he has been in prostration for too long. The young man shouts that he is fine, but thoughts are running through his head that he needs to get ready because you can't undo what you've done. He has already become their master, so if anything, they will cope. The guy leads them to his 2-story mansion and informs them that they have arrived. He tells the two new girls to make themselves at home in his modest estate. The slaves can't stop admiring how beautiful their new place of residence is. As soon as a group consisting of a 10-year-old boy and his new maids find themselves in the living room, which the young man is so proud of, he stands in front of the strangers and says that they should introduce themselves to each other again. The young man bows carefully while closing his eyes and says that his name is All. Such respectful treatment unexpectedly shocks girls who are not used to it. The slave, who does not have an eye and an arm, informs him that the young man should not treat them with great respect. Otherwise, he may receive criticism from other people. The guy complains that he did not know about this because he did not receive a special aristocratic education, and then politely asks them to introduce themselves again. Slave number 4 says that she has no name, so the young man can address her as he wishes. She is good at household chores and fencing. Slave number 7 reports that her name is Yomi. She is also capable of household chores, but besides that, she understands surveillance and knows how to handle a dagger. The last girl, grinning, confidently says that she is also good at adult pleasures. A second later, he declares that he can demonstrate his skills tonight. Here, the first slave enters the conversation and shouts at her friend in embarrassment, saying that while she is here, she will not allow her to do various indecent things with the master. Looking at the dispute of the girls with whom he has to live for a long time, the young man realizes with embarrassment that it seems they will get along well with each other. Also, the young man decides to think about a name for a blonde slave. He pays attention to her blonde hair, which especially shines in the moonlight, so he decides that the name for the girl will be the word moon. Summing up his thoughts, the main character informs slave number 4 that from now on her name is Luna, and he asks if she's okay with it. This makes his companion a little embarrassed. The girl, smiling brightly, but with tears in her eyes, says that, on the contrary, she is very touched that she finally has such a beautiful name. All is very surprised that Luna was so upset that she cried at the new name. He understands that she really had a hard time before. The guy laughs a little, and then offers to discuss the details of their further cooperation over dinner. The girls set the table for their master, put the young man into a stupor by sitting at his feet, sitting on his knees. The guy closes his eyes and looks attentively at his maids. The main character does not understand what is happening and asks his slaves what they are doing. The blonde woman replies that they are happy to sit on the remains of his meal because he has prepared so much, although this is not surprising because his body is young. The young man smiles, realizing that he has again encountered the peculiarities of this world. He says that he set this table for his maids too, because he decided to celebrate their first dinner together. At first, the girls look very surprised by this news. So much so that their mouths opened, and then the girl with brown hair jumps up and says that since the owner has prepared the food, she does not dare to refuse. Both slaves sit down at the table, but Luna does it more hesitantly because they were not taught that way. Yomi doesn't understand why she should refuse if their new owner chose to pamper the heroines like that today. The girls taste the first pieces of the festive dinner and then break into embarrassed smiles and say that they haven't eaten such delicious food for a long time, so they can't even contain their emotions from such a charming taste. While the slaves are busy eating, the guy begins to share with them the reasons why he decided to buy them. He says that he has quite a lot of secrets behind his back, so he would not like to hire servants. And he also needs to keep the house clean. The young man continues, they say. Also at the first meeting, he said that from time to time he would visit the maze and wanted to take them with him. He also plans to go to the Magic Academy in the spring and will be glad if they help him with admission. Luna asks what kind of secrets the guy keeps and whether girls are allowed to know about them because he recently mentioned them.